Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, monsieur le greffier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brelade. Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
We don't make any observation until the second roll call.
Monsieur le connétable de Gruville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Ouen.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Southern. Madame le deputy Labby. Monsieur le deputy Tadier.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Luce.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Doublé. Monsieur le deputy Morel.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Lehegara. Monsieur le deputy Ayer.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Ward.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Alves. Madame le deputy Gardner. Monsieur le deputy Gorst.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Farnham.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Moore. Monsieur le deputy Mezek.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Joseph.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Balash.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Coles.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Porre. Monsieur le deputy War.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Miles. Madame le deputy Scott. Monsieur le deputy Renouf.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Curtis. Madame le deputy Feltham. Madame le deputy Binet. Madame le deputy Jeune. Madame le deputy Miller. Madame le deputy Howe. Monsieur le deputy Binet.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Kovac. Monsieur le deputy Curtis.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Ward. Madame le deputy Wilson. Madame le deputy Stevenson. Monsieur le deputy Andrews.
Présent.
The microphones are not all working, so it may be difficult to hear you from anyone outside the chamber, but Monsieur le Doyen.
Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait le ciel et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et la puissance de la terre, pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions que te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir le cœur et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, de les conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit que toute leur délibération est accompagnée de ta bénédiction. Réussisse au bien-être du soulagement du peuple, qu'il te plut de commettre à leur soin. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par le mérite de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné à t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonnons nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous envoie point en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car à toi est le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brelade.
So the Constable of St Brelard is delayed with an appointment this morning, but he assures me he'll be as soon as possible.
Excusez.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Clément.
Yes, sir, is excuse
Well, why?
my lad.
Well, he's Mallard then, if you'd stand and...
Oh,
No.
sorry.
Mallard is a different thing from excusez.
Vous jurez que Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Clément est tellement indisposé qu'il ne peut pas assister aux États sans exposer sa santé.
Okay.
Monsieur le député Southern.
Présent.
Madame le député Dublé.
Et vous?
Pardon, elle est malade.
Vous jurez que Madame le député Dublé est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister aux États sans exposer sa santé. Madame le député Alves.
Présente.
Les États sont constitués. Very well. Members will be aware that the former Connétable of St John, Carl Hinno, passed away last week. Carl Hinno, widely known as Carl, was born in 1940 in Jersey, and his family farmed in St John. His education started at St John's School, where he was relieved to find that his class teacher was conversant in Guerrier, because that was the language that was spoken in the Hinno family home. At the age of 12, he moved to Holier School, where he showed enthusiasm for sports, football being his first love. After leaving school, he farmed alongside his father, but also branched out into a small haulage business. And later in life, this led to an involvement in the retail trade, shipping, greenhouse, nursery, and property development. He married his wife Daphne in 1964, and the couple had a daughter, Julie. Mr. Hinno joined the Honorary Police in St John and gave many years' service as a constable's officer, and then centenier before he entered the world of politics. He was a regular player at the St John's Football Club, which he served as assistant secretary, vice president, and club president for a number of years. He took up shooting with the Miniature Rifle Club and was the founding secretary of the Jersey Tug of War Association. The Jersey Tug of War team competed in Holland, Dublin, Sweden, South Africa, and England, and in 1977 he became the vice president of the Tug of War International Federation and was involved in organising the World Championships, which were held in Jersey during that same year. In 1983, he was elected for the first time as deputy of his parish and was subsequently elected in the next three elections in 1987, 1990 and 1993. In 1994, he was elected as Connétable of St John, a position he then held for the next 6 years. During his tenure, he was instrumental in organising various parish celebrations marking the liberation and the millennium, and he served on the Special Occupation and Liberation Committee, formed to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the liberation, establishing many of the key elements of that day's celebrations, which are still enjoyed by islanders today. During his time in this assembly, Mr. Hinno served on an impressive 15 committees, including IDC, the Island Development Committee, as the Planning Committee was then known, Housing, Fort Regent Development Committee, the Prison Board, Employment and Social Security, Postal Administration, and Finance and Economics. He was the president of IDC from 1993 to 1996 and held the role of vice president of the Housing Committee and served as president of the Public Services Committee from 1999. Under his leadership, Springfield Stadium was created, Mr. Hinno having successfully negotiated the land from the RJA and HS. He also oversaw the purchase of land for the town gyratory traffic system, and whilst president of the IDC, the development of Morier House, which currently houses the State's Greffe, Viscounts and Law Officers Department. After his retirement in December 2000, he became one of St John's procureur, and in 2003 joined the Parish Magazine Committee with responsibility for advertising and revenue. He also joined the Jersey New Waterworks Company as a director, a position which he held for over a decade after retiring from the Assembly. He gave many years of service to his island and his beloved parish of St John, and we express our thanks for his contribution to island life and extend our deepest condolences to his wife Daphne, daughter Julie, and the rest of his family. And I would ask members to join me in a minute's silence. May you rest in peace. Before continuing with public business, firstly, could I thank Deputy Porre for her contribution to the Greffiers Fighting Fund? And I should point out that my screen is not working. That will prove no difficulty with voting because the greffier confirms the vote to me. But in terms of people wishing to speak, could you please make sure that I have definitely caught your eye before turning your light off? Otherwise, I may simply not note you and see you. It looks like all the lights are in fact working. There has been some questions raised, I understand, as to precisely what it is that's being debated over the next debate. And that's because the order paper, the running order, which has been provided attached to the order paper, contains an earlier version of the Council of Ministers amendment to Amendment number 5. The version that you have in terms of the actual amendment is correct, and that's what is being debated. But if you ignore what is written on the running order, which was intended obviously to be helpful, but things have changed slightly since then, and so that's not the precise wording that is being debated. What is being debated is the actual document on the amendment to the Fifth Amendment. So people need to be looking at that to know the precise wording. Was that something arising, or were you ready to kick off?
Yeah, so if I may ask, we reduced the lodging period on an amendment which may not be the correct amendment that people were looking at. I wonder if it's therefore now valid.
Well, the order paper, the running order provided by the state's gref is of no specific validity. It's something done to be helpful, but it doesn't carry any official weight. What carries weight is the actual document that was lodged, and that is the document upon which the Assembly is deemed to have made its decision when it permitted it to be argued. Do you have something arising from that?
So, just may be helpful to say that it was the green finance issue, which is the area which the council was the actual council's amendment that I referred to in the remarks when we had that debate yesterday. So there was a clear discrepancy, which I'm grateful that you've cleared up. But we did refer to the word green finance, and that's the difference between the amendment. It widens the sustainability thing.
Thank you. But just to be absolutely clear, if members ignore what is on the running order and simply deal purely with what the document itself says, that is what we were debating. We now continue with the debate on Deputy Ward's Fifth Amendment. And Deputy, we had taken a break at the beginning of your opening speech, so you're still proposing the amendment. Deputy.
Thank you, sir. I'm not going to speak for a long time. I spoke yesterday. I'll just sum up. So it's very difficult to speak in detail today on the original proposition, as the key is as to whether the amendment is accepted. I say this and refer to your ruling in accepting the amendment here for a specific and relevant reason, because the ruling states the amendment from Council of Ministers would not, in its terms, if adopted, make any decision about fossil fuel or about fracking. The most that could be said that these may be questions, may form part of the green finance, but would not necessarily do so. The amendment, if adopted, would in effect negate the first two parts of Amendment 5. That's the ruling. I'll read that again so that you are clear. I know repetition works. The amendment, if adopted, would in effect negate the first two parts of Amendment 5. Now, there seems to be some belief amongst the Minister and others that we can carry on and debate those two parts. It is clear from the ruling that the amendment from the Council of Ministers negates those two parts. Therefore, I would ask the Minister whether he is willing to withdraw his amendment at this point, having now been informed of that ruling, and I would ask for some sort of signifying gesture as to whether that is the case. Okay, it's a shame. So, sir, I will focus on the divestment from fossil fuels and fracking. This is a separate issue from the general one of green finance. Many economies are seeing the need for more sustainable models, which comes under the umbrella of green finance. I support this and encourage it. Indeed, the amendment wording that has been brought by the Council of Ministers, and I hope I'm now reading the right one, we will also support the island's financial sector become a leading sustainable finance centre, and in doing so become a leader of green finance. It's absolutely acceptable if it did not remove the wider and perhaps more urgent issue of fossil fuel investment. Indeed, it's not really different from my amendment wording, which is enable Jersey as a pioneer and global leader in sustainable finance and introduce the legislation required for sustainable finance. I mentioned earlier to one of my colleagues, if I was to ask 10 different people in this assembly, sir, to come up with a definition of how we could bring sustainable finance in, we come up with 10 different definitions. It's like defining a gene. You ask 10 different geneticists, you get 10 different definitions. Coding for a primary protein, structure of a, etc., etc. And so the two issues are not a problem. The problem is that the amendment has, if adopted, would in effect negate the first two parts of Amendment 5. So I am left now, sir, I'm now effectively, we're at a point when I finish speaking on this, if the amendment is adopted, that's the end of the discussion on divestment in fossil fuels and on fracking. And the Minister's shaking his head. He obviously doesn't agree with your assessment, sir. That's a shame, because I don't agree with it, but I absolutely accept it because that's what we do in this Assembly. That's what we signed up for.
Would the Deputy give way, sir?
No, so I won't give way. And for future reference, sir, I won't be giving way to the Minister at all. In parallel, we have, with this discussion on green investment, a situation where the driver of climate change, the burning of fossil fuels, the releasing of trapped carbon in our crust, is being enabled, assisted, and indeed promoted by the parallel financial assessments in fossil fuels. The two things are going on at the same time. Subsequently, we need to address those in parallel. If we do not do that, we are not addressing the full issue. Now is the time to end this tradition of investment in these industries. If we are to limit the rise in global temperatures, we must stop the use of fossil fuels. Unless we divest in these industries, we will be promoting, enabling, and increasing fossil fuel use for future generations to come. That's the reality of where we are. We can have as much green finance as we want, and I support it. It's the right way forward. Economies are supporting it because they're seeing that's the future. Those hedging the markets are seeing it, sir, because they see it as that's the future. No problem. But unless we stop the use and investing in that area of our economy, we stop it, and as a jurisdiction lead the way, we are not addressing the full issue. So the difficulty is that I have to end here because we need the debate on the amendment of this amendment. If we can decide and reject that amendment, I'll be able to listen to the members' views on the majority of this proposition and then address all of them, this amendment, sorry, and then address them in the summing up. But until then, you can talk as much as you want if we accept the amendment to this amendment on fossil fuels and divestment, but you're not going to get a vote on it.
So,
It is
point of
gone.
order.
Sorry, so I'm not giving way.
It's a point of order. Anyone's entitled to make a point of order.
Sir, may I seek a ruling from the chair, sir, that you will allow a discussion on fossil fuels and the amendment to the amendment? I'm just concerned, sir, that there are a number of new members in this assembly that might not be able to understand that an amendment can cover the subject of a negative debate, i.e. that we can advance arguments in the amendment to the amendment in the way that the Deputy seems to be saying he can't. I'm trying to be helpful, sir. Could you please rule that the amendment to the amendment can advance arguments to do with fossil fuels and whether to invest them or not?
The answer is in the debate on the amendment to the amendment, which will follow after Deputy Ward has concluded his speech and the amendment has been seconded. We will then open the debate on the amendment to the amendment. It is open to any member to speak on any subject within that is relevant to the subject matter of the amendment to the amendment. And if it is relevant to discuss fossil fuels and if it is relevant to discuss fracking, then those are things that can be discussed in the debate on the amendment to the amendment. What will not happen, however, is a vote. There will be no vote on whether or not the government should be required to end fracking. There will be no vote on whether or not the government should be required to pursue a policy of disinvestment from fossil fuels. And because there will not be a vote, there will be no clear decision and nothing binding on the government arising out of any discussion on the amendment to the amendment. But it is perfectly permissible to speak about those matters during the amendment to the amendment. What has been rendered partially nugatory by the amendment to the amendment is the ability to vote on it. That I hope clarifies the position.
May I just be absolutely clear, sir? Members can vote against the amendment to the amendment to the amendment if they want to support fossil fuel prohibition to invest in them. They vote against the amendment to the amendment, and they vote with Deputy Ward's then unamended proposition. That is open, effectively.
That is open to members. If members wish a debate and resolution on fossil fuel, if they wish a debate and resolution on fracking, then the only way that that can be achieved is a vote against the amendment to the amendment and a vote for the Fifth Amendment. Is that clear?
Well, I'm grateful for the clarification, sir.
So I have a further point of order.
Yes.
It's just in the same vein, so a ruling from the chair. When one speaks in a debate, although of course it's open to anyone to go as widely as possible within the relevance of a subject,
Yes.
Ultimately we're here to put forward arguments for and against what we're voting on. And if we're debating things that ultimately we can't vote on because they're not in the proposition, then that does surely have some impact on what can be said in terms of influencing government policy.
Yes, I mean, the only thing that can influence government policy, it seems to me, to the extent that government may not particularly wish to be influenced, and I make no observations whether that's the case or not, is a vote on a particular proposition. A discussion can't do that, and that must be right. But obviously a discussion which touches upon, is relevant to the subject being discussed, is something the government is at liberty to take into account if it reflects the obvious desires of the Assembly. I'm not sure I can be more helpful than the explanation I've already given. If you'd like to continue, Deputy Ward.
Yes, thank you, sir, and that is indeed very helpful. Sorry, I lost my track again on the interruptions. Forgive me if I repeat myself, I just got to get my tune.
No, it's fine.
Now is the time to end this tradition in investment in these industries. I made that point before, and it's a very important point. If we are to limit, and I'm going to say this because it's such an important thing to sum up with and end this debate. If we are to limit the rising global temperatures, we must stop the use of fossil fuels. Unless we divest in these industries, we will be promoting, enabling, and increasing future fossil fuel use for generations to come. It is clear then, if you want a vote on this, vote for or against. We have the debate. then you must reject the amendment to this amendment. This amendment that I bring offers you the opportunity to debate in full divestment, debate in full the action of fracking, and debate in full a green finance, which I would have accepted the Minister's amendment if it wasn't getting rid of the other two parts. So you either have the opportunity to debate in full and vote on those parts and vote on them, or you give away your opportunity to vote on those parts and accept the amendment to the amendment. I would suggest that we go back to this full amendment and have the full debate. It is an important issue for this island and the world. We declared a climate change emergency. There are many people out there, and if you came to the Youth Parliament and listened to it, the Youth Parliament are talking to us and saying, do something, act, show what you are going to do for our future generations. Yet at the same time, we are just about to stop the debate and stop the vote on fracking and investment in fossil fuels. That cannot be congruent, and I love the fact I get to use that word, we cannot be congruent with what the Youth Parliament want to do. It is not consistent with the views across this island and the growing understanding of the emergency that we have. So I'm not going to say any more on my amendment now, because the real key one is to stop the amendment to the amendment, and let's go back to this. But it will give me the opportunity, if we have the full debate and the full ability to vote, to listen to your views, for you to have your views, and for a government that wants to interact with the public. We need to have these full debates. It's so important for this Assembly on such a topic. So I will say no more and just say to you, I move the proposition, sir, and we have to move on to the other amendment. Thank you, sir.
Proposition
The
seconded.
amendment, sorry, sir.
Is the Fifth Amendment seconded?
Sir, if I may, a point of clarification in the Deputy's speech, just so I can fully understand his proposition.
Will you give way for a point of clarification, Deputy Ward?
Yeah, go on. Sorry, yes, go on. Yes, of course, sir.
Thank you. I did wait. I could have done it.
No, at least you were polite enough, sorry.
It was just to confirm that in parts A and B of the Deputy's proposition, is it correct that, could he clarify that when he talks about disinvestment, it is disinvestment from not just government investments, it's disinvestment from private business. It would require private businesses in Jersey to stop investing in this way. So I just wanted to clarify that it's not just government investment we're talking about, it's about the island's entire financial services economy as well, sir.
Thank you, sir. Yes, so it says to actively demote an action and disinvestment from fossil fuel linked to investment. It doesn't prescribe how, because that's a complicated process. I absolutely accept that. And I am not one who's worked the financial markets all my life. I could explain the science behind it, but I could not explain the other bits and bobs. But yes, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons, sir, why Jersey is such an important area where we take on this divestment, because we have an influence and such a much wider sphere. So yes, sir, it is about that, but it's not prescribing how that is to be done. That will have to be done in conjunction with business and the way it will work. But yes, I hope that does that answer. Thank you, sir.
Well, it's been seconded, so we now, members will of course be entirely aware that there is an amendment to the amendment lodged by the Council of Ministers, and I ask the greffier to read the amendment to the amendment.
For all the words to be inserted on page 15 of the report, substitute the following words. We will also support the island's financial sector to become a leading sustainable finance centre, and in doing so, become a leader of green finance.
Who is the rapporteur? Are you rapporteur?
The Environment Minister will be the rapporteur, sir.
Very well. Yes, Deb.
Thank you, sir. I would like to take issue with the Deputy's comment that we cannot have the debate. I intend to have debate on the issues of disinvestment and fracking. I intend to speak to those points in my speech. And this amendment allows us to do that because it is an amendment that removes two clauses, and we have to justify the removement of those two clauses. So this is the correct forum to have that debate. So I know that Deputy Ward's amendment is born out of the passionate desire to do more to tackle climate change. And I know that it is frustrating that progress is so slow, that COP27 ended with a whimper rather than a bang, and that globally emissions are still rising. I appreciate that many people in this island would like Jersey to be a leader in emissions reductions, and I share those feelings. I too would love to see faster progress. I too believe that Jersey should be a leader in the battle against climate change. Yet still, I cannot support the first two parts of the Deputy's amendment, and instead I'm asking the Assembly to back the Council of Ministers amendment. I want to explain why, but also to explain why the approach that we are taking as a government will actually achieve more in terms of real change and delivers more in terms of effective leadership. So let me examine Deputy Ward's amendment in more detail. The first part instructs us to actively promote disinvestment from fossil fuel-linked investments from Jersey-linked businesses. Let's leave aside the imprecision in terms like Jersey-linked businesses and fossil fuel-linked businesses and see how that plays out. I think straight away we run into problems. I know that the Deputy is a big fan, as I am, of biofuels as a transitional fuel. He knows, because I've made this point in answer to a question in this chamber and in scrutiny, that the problem we have with biofuels is that they are very expensive, because there just isn't enough supply at the moment. Therefore, we urgently need more investment in biofuel production. Now, one of the bigger investors in biofuels is Shell. They're currently investing in a new biofuels refinery in Rotterdam, for example. So what do we do about Shell? Do we disinvest because it's a fossil fuel giant, or invest because it's also investing in biofuels? And by the way, it's also a big investor in wind power and solar. If we kept in the first clause of the Deputy's amendment, I genuinely do not know whether we should be disinvesting from Shell or not. There are many other examples like this because fossil fuel companies are diversifying. I have no idea how you disinvest from just the fossil fuel parts of these businesses while supporting the other investment that we do want to happen. So that would pose a real problem for our active promotion of disinvestment. What should we be telling the finance sector to do as they make investment decisions? But it's not just the finance sector that this disinvestment policy might cause us problems. There are issues for other businesses operating in Jersey too. We are still dependent on petrol, diesel, fuel oil and gas in this island. We rely on companies supplying these products to keep the island working. Yes, we're engaged in a plan to phase out these fuels, but we are still dependent on them. What if they need investment to keep operating? What if government invested is needed in critical fuel infrastructure? What if Jersey Electricity need to invest in backup fossil fuel generators to maintain our energy security? What if Ports of Jersey need to invest in fuel storage facilities at the airport? These are all fossil fuel-linked investments, are they not? Are we banned from supporting investment on companies on whom we still depend? I'm afraid this part of Deputy Ward's amendment is far too sweeping, far too ambiguous and far too unclear, and in the end, likely to be counterproductive to government policy. That is why we cannot support it. Now let's look at fracking, a part of Deputy Ward's amendment that I'm afraid we cannot support. I want to be clear that I'm not a fan of fracking for the same reasons as the Deputy. But what would be the effect of this amendment in the real world? Once again, there is a problem of clarity. Where do we oppose fracking? The government of Jersey has no intention of fracking. There is no fracking potential in Jersey, so there will be no investment in Jersey in fracking. It's easy to oppose investment in fracking if it just applies to Jersey. If that is all that this amendment stood for, then it would be harmless. Pointless, but harmless. However, it is clear from the Deputy's speech that he intends this amendment to go further. We are to oppose investment in fracking all over the world. I'm not quite sure how, as a government, we would, in practical terms, oppose investment in fracking, but presumably it means we are supposed to tell people and governments that we oppose them investing in fracking. So what would that achieve? We might get some applause from some quarters. I can see the gallery that such a policy would play to. But we might also be heavily criticised for naivety and a lack of understanding. This winter and the next few winters are going to see a huge energy crunch in Europe. Because of the war in Ukraine and the need to replace Russian gas in Europe's energy system, the EU is rushing to buy as much gas as possible. It's a national imperative that I'm afraid trumps in the short term the need to reduce emissions. The lights have to stay on. And before we all get high and mighty about this, let's remember that if for any reason we lost our connection to the French grid, we too would be firing up our fossil fuel-powered backup plants to keep the lights on. And where is this gas coming from? A large chunk is going to come from the USA, from fracked gas supplies. Are we really going to turn around and tell our friends in Europe that we do not think that they should have that gas? That our moral purity says that the money spent investing in fracking is wrong, even if it means that they lose the ability to provide energy to their people? And are we to tell the United States that whilst they're stepping in now with fracked gas to help Europe through the winter, we'd really rather they didn't keep on investing in that? Might those countries not look at us and say something like, it's all very well for you to sit there smugly lecturing the rest of the world on what they should and shouldn't invest in. You're just 100,000 people sitting on the end of an extension cable from the French zero-carbon electricity production. Good for you. What about the rest of us? The reality is that for the short term, the world needs gas, and some of it is going to come from fracking. That is a reality we may not like, but we will win few friends and little influence if we use our privileged and unique position to lecture the rest of the world. Far, far better to show that we understand the difficult decisions that are necessary to get our friends and allies through the energy crunch for the next few years. So, sir, what would work? How could we best be a force for good in the world? How could we use our soft power to advance the case for emissions reductions? There is a better way to give us the leadership role that we all crave. And it's one that will be much more powerful than lecturing. It is to be an inspirational example of change. So I can't remember if I've mentioned this before, but in my previous life I worked in television, making science documentaries. We had a mantra when it came to writing our scripts, which was show, not tell. In other words, don't tell someone that something is amazing. Show them. Use pictures, not words. I would use the same mantra now in the battle to tackle climate change. Show, not tell. Our greatest contribution to this huge, era-defining, generational struggle is to be an exemplar. The best thing we can do is to deliver the change that we need to make, not to lecture other countries about what they should be doing, to show how we have tackled the hard choices. Perhaps for some, this focus on the specifics of what we can deliver isn't enough. It doesn't paint a picture in primary colours. I disagree. It is in the details of how we deliver reductions in carbon emissions that the battle against climate change will be won. These are the hard miles, the tough slog of how we will deliver carbon reduction. This is where we need to put our efforts. Because it's not easy, and I say very frankly that so far we haven't achieved enough. Getting our emissions reduction schemes right matters because ultimately the credibility of the whole transition to net zero depends on these schemes working well and being seen to deliver. We know it's not easy because other countries aren't doing well at it. To give just one example, if we look at the UK, their attempt to introduce a home insulation scheme, the Green Home Grant Scheme, was a total flop. We have to do better. Here in Jersey, my colleague, Deputy Jeune, is working with officers on a scheme to incentivise the shift away from fossil fuel home heating systems. There's a lot of detail to sort out. What are the criteria for people to qualify for help? Do we need different schemes for people on different incomes? How do we make sure that people get the right advice and we don't end up installing a heating solution that doesn't work for them? Which low-carbon technology should we support? Do we need to increase the number of qualified fitters able to install equipment, and if so, how? What's the comeback for the public if something goes wrong with the installation? And so on. A lot of detailed questions that need answering before we can launch our scheme. That's what I want us to be spending our time doing, sweating the details and getting it right. And there is another positive way in which we can show our leadership in the climate struggle, through our great strength in finance. So now I come to the third part of the Deputy's amendment. This we can work with, which is why we have sought to amend and build on his amendment. We are determined to promote sustainable finance, and I'm sure that colleagues will talk about that later. We do not think there is a need to introduce legislation to enable sustainable finance. Indeed, I'm not sure what meaningful legislation would be in that context. But yes, in terms of the principle of the Deputy's amendment, we do want to promote sustainable finance because we all recognise there is a huge prize here, both for us as an island, because we'll be at the cutting edge of where finance is heading, but also for the planet, because we can play such a significant role in enabling other jurisdictions to achieve the changes that are needed. So let us concentrate not on rhetoric, but on what is deliverable, what is in our power to achieve, and what will make a meaningful difference to islanders' lives, and what will make us a genuine and inspiring beacon of carbon zero achievement. I want to be able to walk tall when it comes to our policies on net zero, but I want to do it on the basis of our actual achievements, not on lecturing from the sidelines. Show, not tell. Thank you, sir.
Is the amendment to the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Deputy Taddeo.
Thank you, sir. It's nice to be back in the Assembly. I've got this cast on in case I need to start banging the desk, as has become a custom for some St Brelard representatives. And I'm glad that the first speech when I'm back is to respond and I think to rebut some of what my ostensibly green colleague from St Brelard has been telling us today. We're talking about a climate emergency, although listening to the last speech, you might think that we've actually got decades to try and solve this. He also talked about the fact that COP22, I can't remember the exact word, I think he said it was a damp squib rather than a bang. And actually, the exact logic which he's been expounding in his opening opposition to Deputy Ward's proposition amendment, replacing it with this watered-down version, is very much the kind of compromise that led to the damp squib of COP23. It was because governments who are currently in power, governments who are actually part of the problem, not part of the solution, and have got us into this mess by greed, rather than looking at the sustainability of the planet, find all sorts of excuses for inaction. And so when they talk about leading by showing rather than telling, it's completely meaningless in my mind. We also talk about carbon neutrality, and it led me to think of another statement about remaining neutral from Desmond Tutu, which says, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen to side with the oppressor. If an elephant has a foot on the tail of a mouse and you say you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. Now, Desmond Tutu, somebody who I think I've got a lot of time for, and he spoke across the political spectrum during his long time, if you can say in politics, I think, even though he was an archbishop. We could change some of those words there. Now, we know about the injustice, about climate justice and climate injustice in the world. It's something that goes hand in hand when serious people are talking about the climate emergency, sir. And if we replace the words about the mouse, etc., if we say, if you're neutral in a situation of climate injustice and about the climate emergency, you've chosen to side with the oppressor, with the polluters, with the frackers, with those who would continue to want to have their cake and eat it. The likes of Shell, who might on the one hand say, but it's okay because we've got an element of greenwashing here, but we want people to still continue to invest in Shell. I mean, why would we be sending out the message? Why would the environment minister, who's been elected on a recent election by a very large constituency of environmentalists and green voters in St Brelard, and I know who they are because they're also a core of my constituents and my voters too, want to say that we want to be investing in Shell? We wouldn't want to put out a message to say don't invest in Shell because Shell might also be investing in some biofuels. I mean, is that what the arguments come to? If an elephant has a foot on the tail of a mouse, if the capitalist model has its foot on the throat of the planet, and you say that you are neutral, You're siding with the model that has still got its foot on the throat of the planet, and you will not be appreciated for your neutrality in that context, sir. What we've got here is a perfectly acceptable proposition from Deputy Ward as it is. So it talks about actively promoting an action for the divestment in fossil fuel-linked investments. It doesn't talk about discouraging anything. It's very positive in its wording. So it says promote divestment. And of course, if I read between the lines of the question that came from Deputy Morell, will this apply to businesses that are not states-controlled? Well, of course it will. In the same way that the states is at liberty, and it does it all the time, to send out, if you like, moral messages and policies. So, for example, we do have an active policy about violence on women. We have an active policy on diversity, which applies not just to the states as an entity, but it applies to an aspiration that we have for the wider community. So if we put out a message saying we want to combat violence against women and young girls, that doesn't just apply to the states as an entity, to states' employees, and the states as an employer. It applies to the wider community. Of course, that then has to happen when it comes to divesting from fossil fuels. In the same way that we wouldn't say, oh, well, you know, when we put somebody in prison because they've committed an act of violence against a woman and they get found guilty, we don't say, but by putting them in prison, you might stop that person from doing lots of other good things that he might be doing when he's in society. The Shell example, we say, no, there's a type of behaviour that we want to clamp down on in society and in the wider world, not just because we're moralists and we want to send out a message, but because this kind of behaviour is actively killing the planet. And I go back to the point, if I'd have shown this to any constituent, and I take a liberty here, and I'm sure that even if I'd have shown this wording from Deputy Ward to the not quite yet elected Deputy Renouf, he would be supporting the entirety of what Deputy Ward was proposing here. And if he had listened to a right-wing minister standing up, coming up with all sorts of reasons not to support this, he would have been the first to cry, this is complete greenwashing. We won't accept any dilution of our policies. And I can hear, I'm not sure if they're listening back in St. Bernard's, but I know the same supporters who were campaigning on the environmental ticket, and they've been doing so at least since 1993, when I think that this state first put in Deputy Gary Matthews, who's no longer with us, sir. They would be saying, no, do things properly. Jersey can actually send out a moral message to the world, but not so much for doing that, but they can actually send a message to themselves and decide what we want to do. How many times have we heard that we are responsible for our own decisions in this assembly? Well, we want to develop our international identity and the message that we can send out. And in the same way that when a state's deputy brought a proposition on the Iraq war, and the states passed the decision to say that we opposed the invasion of Iraq. Did that have any impact? It doesn't really matter whether it didn't stop the war, but it shows that to the people locally that if you want to have an impact, if you have a moral direction and a compass, that you can bring a proposition to your assembly and that assembly decides on the wording in front of it. Now, I'm concerned about what the amendment actually does, because it does negate, it takes out all that good wording that we have initially, and then it simply replaces it by, we will also support the island's financial sector to become a leading sustainable finance centre. There's a couple of problems there. First of all, it simply focuses on finance, the finance industry. Now, we're not going to get into a debate about the finance industry now, but again, it just puts the attention on all of the other stuff. What about all the other industries, everything else that Jersey can and does do as a wider concept? And it puts it back onto the idea of this is all about the finance industry, the finance centre that has become Jersey, the finance centre that ministers see as synonymous with Jersey. Jersey is more than a finance centre. But it's also a problem for a different reason, because it says we want Jersey to become a leading sustainable finance centre. So it suggests that Jersey isn't a leading sustainable finance centre. So if we agree, because it says become, it doesn't say to remain or to make it even more of a sustainable, leading sustainable finance centre. It says to become that. So we might send out the message of saying, we actually recognise that Jersey isn't sustainable in terms of its finance centre at the moment, and to become a leader in green finance. And we don't need this amendment because the amendment is already encapsulated by what Deputy Ward is asking about, sir. So what I would ask is that any member of this assembly just weighs up which is the best option. By rejecting the amendment put forward by the Minister, we allow the full scope of eventualities that is put forward in here, and we send a strong message to the Council of Ministers saying, not only do we want you to act on these things and treat them with urgency. For example, if you think that fracking is actually a good thing, I mean, you want the world to carry on fracking, then of course vote for the amendment. But if you want to give us the ability to stop practices like fracking, as little as we are in Jersey, and send a message and say, we don't think fracking's the right way forward. We think that the gas, like the natural gas that's trapped under the crust of this earth, should remain there. In 2022, when we've just had COP23, 27, sorry, I'm losing track of these dates will no doubt come very quickly. We think that gas should remain under the earth. There should be no question of you anywhere, wherever you are, doing that. And we, for our part, will send a strong message to our investors in Jersey that we don't want you investing in any companies that will do things like fracking. That's quite clear. That's the intention that we're setting out here. There's lots of sophistry, I perceive, in the words that have been said. The message is very clear. Do we want to send that message out to local industries, whether they're state-owned or in the private sector, to say, when you go about doing your investments, as you already do, you have governance departments that you look at already, that look at these things for you. When it comes to a choice between investing in perhaps Shell, because that's who you've been with for the last 30 years, or investing in a startup which has proven itself to be developing really interesting technology and which needs your investment, it should be clear which one you choose for. In the same way that when you look at employing someone, you consider matters of diversity. It doesn't mean that you choose the wrong person for the job. You choose the person who's the best for the job, but considering all the factors. Same when you're investing. You look at the whole portfolios you're investing in, our pensions, for example, and you make sure you don't invest in those areas which look dubious. You invest in the areas which are truly green, not simply greenwashing, sir. For me, the decision is very clear.
Very much, Deputy. Connie Harbison Saviour.
Thank you, sir. I may be about to upset a few people, sir, but here we go. I think the Minister for the Environment has been somewhat coy in his response, because it's my opinion that the Western world is in for the whole world, excuse me, is in for a very, very rough time for the next 3 years, with COVID followed by Ukraine. I think there's going to be many, many problems. If someone's asked, do you believe in fracking? Of course not. It's a pretty hideous thing to do. But if it's a choice between that and people possibly going cold or worse, then I would go for fracking. It's as simple as that. We are in serious trouble with regarding food and fuel supplies around the world. But I would like to sort of go for balance. Do we need to electrify in Jersey? Absolutely. Jersey is a perfect place to electrify with electric vehicles. One of the main problems with electric vehicles is the range, but we don't have that problem in Jersey, so it's actually perfect. But we don't have the infrastructure yet, so we will need petrol and diesel vehicles. And it's the diesel part that's going to be the problem. If diesel goes up in expense, then everything goes up. Food and all consumables will rise accordingly. There are many people in the UK suffering food shortage at the moment, that they're having 2 meals a day instead of 3. And in the United States, for instance, people are living, I think 45% of people are living paycheck to paycheck. And it's one of those horrendous things that are happening at the moment. but balancing that with what's happening, for instance, in China, where they have, I think, 53 nuclear power stations, and the rest are coal-fired power stations, of which there are 1,110 at the moment, coal-fired power stations. Do we have to do our bit? Of course we do. But there is a balance to be had, and it's where that balance lies. It's a horrendous situation, but I think we need to keep going at the moment, make sure that people are fed and that people have warmth throughout the winter. I'll leave it there, sir, but if we have a debate in the future, I'll be more than happy to partake in that, sir. Thank you.
Very much. Connétable, Deputy Joseph.
Sir, I am a follower of Nelson Mandela. And on a day when I think it was either today or tomorrow, the President of South Africa is addressing both the Houses of Commons in a unique visit. He will no doubt reflect on the words of Nelson Mandela himself. He said, "It always seems impossible until it is done." He said, "Do not judge me by my successes, judge me how many times I fell down and got back up again. What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived, it is what difference we have made that will determine the significance of the life we need." He said, "A good head and a good heart are a formidable combination." So I regret the remarks of Deputy Tadje and those that have said that the Environment Minister is being partial in his support for carbon neutrality and carbon neutrality in Jersey. I absolutely agree that we have to lead. I am wearing a green jacket that I wore at the Labour Party conference when I saw the shallow Chancellor, and she said she wants to be the Green Chancellor. And so I went to go and get my green jacket, and I said, Chancellor, Shadow Chancellor, I want to be the Green External Relations Minister for Jersey. And she said, great, let's have a photo shoot. And so we did. That is diplomacy, that is advancing. I actually think the Labour government in the UK is improving the Conservatives' policy on net zero. But are we really going to be saying to the people of the whole of Europe that are facing, and I read on the BBC website an excellent article by Jenny Hill, that Jersey girl who's now the BBC correspondent in Germany. She puts in just the scale of difficulty of this winter's problem in Germany in terms of removing their requirement on fossil fuels. Are we really going to be in this assembly saying that we're going to actually disinvest from fossil fuels immediately? I see Deputy Mezek nodding. Really? Does he actually believe? Because that's what this amendment actually says. Maybe he'll get his chance to speak, sir. Jenny Hill, in her article this morning, said when Vladimir Putin switched off the gas tap to Europe, Germany feared more than most of winter blackouts and has scrambled to secure alternative supplies painfully away from a heavily dependence on Russian gas that has now left this industrial nation woefully exposed. The transition that the Minister spoke about is real. It is difficult. You don't always, Nelson Mandela said, when you reach the top of one mountain, you need to continue to climb. And in embarking on our own island's advancement of net zero, we are going to have to climb mountains. We have to recognise that other countries around the world have got critical energy shortages. Is it more important in the short term to see the war against Ukraine fought, net zero being blown up literally by towns and cities in Ukraine getting their energy supplies bombed from Russia, and the West needing to provide alternative energy sources? Are those fossil fuels going to be permitted to allow people across the Ukraine, across Germany, across the whole of Europe to find the fuel that they need in their difficult winter ahead? I, sir, could not vote in favour of a proposition which nodded towards effectively a prohibition of fossil fuels. Unfortunately, Deputy Ward's incredibly well-intentioned, and I commend Deputy Ward's work on having, in the 4 years I was not here, advanced fossil fuel targets in Jersey. He was, I think, the member that actually got this assembly to accept the fact that there was a climate change emergency. He should be credited with that. But we need to work together. Our amendment to his amendment does reject that problem issue of investing in fossil fuels in the short term. Our amendment, however, takes the third item of what he was put in his proposition, and we think actually improves it. Sustainable and green finance is our island's future. The future, we should say loudly and proudly, is for clean, green economic growth. We think the opportunity is large. We think it's in fact larger than that in which the Minister for Financial Services under the previous government issued the financial framework. We think that it is the case that in the next 5 years, it's predicted that 1/5 of the global investment funds will be invested in some form of sustainable finance. Already, 40% of global banking assets are now the Net Zero Alliance members. Sustainability loans represent 10% of this market. The next generations of wealth creators are also embracing the fight against climate change, and they're moving their money to green finance. This will finance the monumental costs of the world's transition to net zero. Transition, not switching off, transition. Trillions, sir, are needed. And we in Jersey, we believe by accepting a bolder part 3 of his amendment, which unfortunately we can't vote in part, but it is the third part of the Deputy's amendment that we're seeking to actually improve, extend. We think that Jersey can play a really meaningful part in that energy transition. We need to deliver it. We need to enable it, but we can't often in detail prescribe it. We need to look how we can support green growth, but not risk limiting it by imposing what is being asked about in the unamended proposition of effectively an artificial barrier on certain investments and burdening, frankly, our finance industry with the limits on how they can assist that journey to move to net zero. The global economy is not, as the Minister has said, fuelled by green energy alone. Huge green energy infrastructure projects are going to be required before the world can be fueled by green energy alone. This needs funding. This needs finance. And I hope the Assistant Minister for the Environment will speak about the brilliant observations and conversations that she heard in Sharm el-Sheikh. I agree with the Minister. I think it was a damp squib. I think there was nothing like the kind of bold initiative should be taken. But we can lead in Jersey. I want to see our Council of Ministers, if I may speak as a member for St Saviour, I want to see us advancing on that net zero. I'd like to see our own parish of St Saviour be the first green parish, having electric vehicles, having hydrogen vehicles. He's got one, sir. He's saying he's got one, sir. Let's have more. Let's have St Saviour, sir, as the green parish. But it can't be done overnight. And that's the issue. It may be laughed at by Deputy Southern, but it's true. It's going to take time. The transition is required, is difficult. People, customers, clients, citizens all need to heat their homes. They need to put energy in their vehicles. Fuel is a vital part of society. It is required for businesses as they move their goods and services around the globe. Those disruptions to energy supplies that have been created by Russia in their illegal war in Ukraine mean that even tougher decisions are going to have to be taken. I think the Minister thinks an opportunity was missed at COP27 to actually make faster, meaningful international developments. Disinvestment, which is what the Deputy's proposition as unamended says, is not, with the greatest of respect, reasonable or deliverable. We need an appropriate response. We're also still dealing with the post-COVID economic crisis, That's now leading, if it's not only the Putin invasion that's causing inflation, that backdrop of COVID with printing money by the ECJ, the Bank of England, the Bank of the US Federal Reserve, that's causing inflationary pressures. That's making matters worse. That's making this winter for our community here and communities around the world even worse. It's making that fossil fuel price increase even more acute. Some may say that actually they made the wrong decisions, but I've got no evidence of the future, but I can learn from the past. We need great care to not unwisely or even maybe unthinkingly destabilise financial markets. We are a capital warehouse, a big one. What's the message that we're going to send out today to disinvest from fossil fuels? Disinvest from fossil fuels that are needed to heat people's homes as they deal with the transition of stopping buying Russian gas and oil and get fracked gas from America, or dare I even say it, Qatar. Whose side are we on? Are we on the side of the long-term climate change people? Absolutely. Do we also need to be on the side of those people this winter and next winter who are going to face perilous difficulties in respect of heating their own homes? I say to members respectfully, the Council of Ministers is not playing games. We're not doing any... I saw the deputy nod. I'm sad about that. We are trying sincerely and with good heart, in the way that other people would be, to be realistic about what we can achieve. We will argue that it is not possible to deliver an immediate lockout of disinvestment in fossil fuels. Punishing the most vulnerable isn't the way forward. Nelson Mandela would have agreed with that. He said, "I never lose, I either win or learn." Let's learn from each other. Let's learn. Let's learn about what's possible. Let's listen to the Environment Minister. Nobody would doubt that our Environment Minister isn't an environmentalist. Not one of those people that Deputy Tadia in St Ballard spoke about that. He absolutely is right. Sir, our amendment is carefully judged. Our amendment pushes the Council of Ministers to go further. Not as what he just said, sustainable finance, go further in green initiatives. I say the amended proposition is commendable of this Assembly's absolute endorsement. It's endorsement because it was brought by the Environment Minister, not the Financial Services Ministers, the Environment Minister. I commend the Environment Minister and the Assistant Minister for all they're doing in pushing us to have net zero earlier. We can sell Jersey as a centre for green finance if we get our own house in order. Let's push that net zero target. Let's do it earlier. Let's insulate more homes. Let's do it quicker than the UK, quicker than Labour, quicker than any other European Union country. And let's then go and grow our economy with a trade and services business centre of excellence, where we do what we say and we say what we mean. Sir, I commend the amendment to the Assembly.
Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. I just want to start by saying we've all heard the term of greenwashing. I feel that the amendment to the amendment, got to get these ones right, is not just greenwashing, but it's also greenwashing with a pre-rinse cycle done at 60 degrees, with a bit of turf thrown in and hoping that something's going to come out green at the other side. Because we're paying platitudes to the crisis that we're actually facing. And saying that we would aim to become a leader is dragging our heels on the crisis of the environment, where the amendment itself strongly suggests what we need to proactively do now to show the world that we are taking proactive steps now to achieve goals. The deputy next to me, who's now leaving, seems to forget that the Common Strategic Policy is designed to go over 3 years, 2023 to 2026. So it gives us 3 years to manoeuvre our portfolios, to de-invest in fossil fuels, to reinvest in growing green enterprises, to provide a structure for financing these technologies worldwide, to start make those steps become in leaps and bounds and move us forward, rather than staggering backwards and saying, well, we can't make an impact. We've heard it time and time again that Jerzy is a leader when it comes to finance, and yet the Minister, in his amendment to the amendment, is saying to become. So when did we take the step backwards? Listening to the Connétable of St Saviour talking about China, and he mentions about them having a large number of coal-fired places, which is very true. They took all of our manufacturing. This is why they have to produce so much energy and require different things. But he also fails to mention that China have some of the largest solar arrays in the world. So they are proactively trying to de-invest in their coal, and they're trying to create more nuclear, whether that is the greenest alternative. It's certainly greener than coal and oil. We know that for a fact. It's not perfect. Nothing really ever seems to be. We also talk about de-investing from companies like Shell. And I don't know if everybody else has seen the news that we're talking about the energy crisis, the cost of energy going up, and people facing shortages and having huge increases in their energy bills across the UK and many aspects of the world. Well, Shell produced some of their largest profits that they have seen in decades through this crisis. They are exploiting people's needs for this energy. We're not just getting energy from... This isn't just putting sanctions on Russia that's causing this increase in this. It's greed. The caps on energy costs across the world have been removed so they can charge people more and more for their energy. So we should be de-investing them out of moral objection to exploiting the poor and the needy who need their energy to keep them warm over winter. We should be helping to insulate these homes as a matter of course, so they don't need to use as much energy. So these companies will get less of our money. Sorry, I'm realising I'm not supposed to be doing that. So there is so much wrong by removing these other, by amending my colleague's amendments. We have to, and to completely remove the point on fracking. Fracking is environmental vandalism. We are smashing up the Earth's crust to get at this, and not to mention the destabilisation that it does of surrounding areas, the impact on nature and the environment around it. And I sit there and I think, we talk about greenwashing, and all I can see is this is actually going to be brownwashing, because all that's going to be left is water that is brown and it's disgusting and that we're not going to want to drink it. If we ignore the environment in such a strong way, we will have nothing left. We can keep investing in oil and all these other bits and pieces, have all this money that we're going to sit there. But when the sea levels rise and we lose all of our wetlands around our island, we're all going to be clustered on a hill looking at somebody's big wallet full of cash. Rather than if we actually spend that money now, we might actually still keep our wetlands. I mean, the common strategic policy is about pushing ourselves forward. And I believe Deputy Ward's amendment actually does that. It puts us on a pegging that we are going to start moving forward, that we are going to look at solutions rather than just sit on our heels. And I think I'll leave it there, because I'll probably get too over-passionate, probably push the desk over. So thank you very much.
I'm observing that people are falling into the habit of giving verbal responses when other people are speaking, whether they agree or disagree or wish to make an observation on it. The risk, obviously, it's permissible for members to talk to each other quietly in a way that doesn't interrupt the speaker, but if the speaker pauses, then inevitably that's interrupted them. And I'd be asked members just to be careful and to avoid verbal comment in response to speeches that they're hearing. People have the opportunity to speak when it's their turn. Very well. Deputy Jean.
Thank you, sir. Yes, we are in a climate emergency, and yes, there is a lot to do. I get as passionate and frustrated about the pace of the transition globally and the heel-dragging as Deputy Ward. I've been working in this space at an international level since I was 23. Back then it was COP8, and I was supporting civil society in its sister summit of the Commission for Sustainable Development, discussing the concerns of water stress because of climate change and the need for sustainable consumption and production, which included the role of the finance industry in promoting unsustainable production and consumption. It is well known and recognised internationally that the financial system not only has contributed substantially to doing harm to our planet and its peoples, but that we also need it to fund the transition. We need it to rewire our entire economies, and finance has a critical role to play. Governments and public finance cannot do it alone. Action needs private finance and at an unprecedented scale to fund the literally trillions of pounds of additional investment and decarbonisation that will be needed to happen every year for decades. But change is happening. As Mark Carney, the former head of the Bank of England, stated, companies that don't adapt will go bankrupt without question. I stood in the summer's election on a manifesto to make all finance coming through Jersey ensure it is ESG, which is environment, social and governance considerations, underpin it. To make Jersey a truly sustainable finance jurisdiction. I recognise that this is ambitious, but it underpins my drive. Philanthropy and tweaking the edges won't stop the degradation of our planet. Fundamental change will. And I am fully supportive of Jersey Citizens Assembly on climate change, who also recognise this, and who made a number of recommendations that indicated public support for addressing Scope 3 emissions and the important role of Jersey finance industry in this. This push means the Carbon Neutral Roadmap has developed policy which tackles sustainable finance and clearly sets out agreed work areas, which with this amended proposition can push even further. One, to establish a public finance sustainable financing framework to improve sustainability of the government's own investments and debt, which would mean phasing out stranded assets. Climate finance, to develop options to increase the amount and impact of money the island provides to support climate mitigation and adaptation measures overseas. And continue to support the island's finance industry to become a leading sustainable finance centre and support leaders and local businesses to make informed decisions about how their money is invested. And for consumers and employees, they are powerful in this regard because they can demand that where their pension money and their investment goes, it can help support the transition and help the finance industry change. But Jersey cannot be pioneering in this space because there are already significant developments changing that, in this landscape and shows how complex rewiring economies can be. I'm going to list just a few developments that the finance industry will be impacted on and how it will have to deal with investing in fossil fuel and fracking, because they are interlinked between there is interlinkage between disinvestment and sustainable and green finance. Central banks in countries covering 2/3 of global emissions are now pursuing climate stress tests. There is the TCFD, climate change-related financial reporting, which is critical because what gets measured gets managed, designed to help companies provide better information to support informed capital allocation. There are huge strides being made by the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosure, which is delivering a risk management and disclosure framework for organisations to report and act on evolving nature-related risks, with the ultimate aim of supporting a shift in global financial flows away from natural negative outcomes and towards nature-positive outcomes. Better disclosures and the heightened sense of urgency will lead to a transformation of climate risk management, which will include winding down stranded assets in fossil fuels, naturally. At COP27, a proposal by Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, outlined a new finance solution to the climate crisis. She argued that the global financial system is not set up to deliver on the scale needed to avert climate disaster, and that reformed global financial architecture is required. This proposal is gathering huge support to reform the global financial architecture. This is great news. I've also worked on pushing for reform of the global financial system for years, so we need to back these reforms. The EU taxonomy of sustainable economic activities is a classification tool that seeks to provide companies, capital markets and policymakers, investors, on which economic activities are environmentally sustainable, was put into effect earlier this year, and also includes definitions of where to invest, positively invest, and where to also not invest when it comes to fuel. The EU is also developing a carbon border adjustment mechanism, which would place a carbon tariff on electricity, cement, aluminium, fertiliser, and iron and steel products imported from outside the EU. This again will have huge impact on how investors will invest in fossil fuel. In 2021, a court in The Hague ordered Shell to cut its global carbon emissions by 45% by the end of 2030, ensuring it needs to legally adapt its business model towards renewable energy and biofuels, and they need their investors to support this change. This year, France, Spain, Poland and the Netherlands started withdrawing from the controversial Energy Charter Treaty. The EU is also amending this. This treaty was used by corporations that operate oil fields, gas pipelines and coal-fired power plants to launch legal cases against states that pass legislation to fight climate change and curb CO2 emissions. 74% of ECT cases involve an EU investor against an EU country. To have these countries pull out of this such charter and have the amendments being made is a huge game change, because the court cases have been always done in secret, meaning that countries, as Deputy Tadier was saying, they were not doing enough, but it meant that countries were unable to tell their citizens they were unable to do more on their climate commitments because they were in active court cases and had to pay out millions in compensation against against the investors' potential loss in their own compensation. So there is change, and it's happening now. But we are still dependent on petrol, diesel, fuel oil and gas in this island and beyond. We rely on companies supplying those products to heat our homes and power our cars. We are engaged in a plan to phase out those fuels. We're engaged in front-loading this plan as quickly as possible, and in the near future bringing in legislation to ban fossil fuel heating in cars. But we are unfortunately still dependent on them. Moving away from fossil fuels too quickly will disrupt the market and is likely to escalate the economic crisis. In doing so, the financial impact is likely to fall most heavily on the financially vulnerable. This fails to ensure a just transition, one of the key principles of Jersey's carbon neutral roadmap. Therefore, I believe making sure Jersey is a true sustainable and green finance jurisdiction, where all finance coming through Jersey has ESG conditions underpinning it, means that risk management would show that the fossil fuel assets will become stranded assets is the most important way to go. Thank you.
Deputy Felton.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't actually intending to speak today, but some of the speeches I feel need some responses. And I was reminded actually of listening to the radio just a few weeks ago when children of Montelabbé School were talking about the environment and climate change and why successive governments weren't doing anything about it. I was listening with my 8-year-old daughter, who turned to me and said, "Mummy, everybody agrees that climate change needs to have something done about it. Everybody agrees, and yet they don't do anything." I didn't have an answer. Now, if I go back to her today and say that a minister said, well, the answer to that is I'm going to wear a green jacket and then fly to London on a weekly basis, I'm not quite sure what she'd say. Back to this amendment. I'm struggling to find within the speeches that have been made by ministers exactly what the purpose of this amendment is and how and why it was worded and framed in the way it has been. I would like the Minister for Environment to explain to us in his summing up why he didn't just seek to have the original amendment taken in parts so that the first 2 parts could be discussed and debated in a democratic way, and then to have amended that 3rd part to the wording that the government felt was better. That would have been a more collaborative approach. We hear a lot from this government about collaboration, and the bringing of this amendment, and the reason why I encourage all members to vote against this amendment, is this is not collaborative and it is not democratic. I'm talking about democracy, and again, thinking about what I teach my daughter about democracy, and when I've seen school students in here. One thing that school students are taught when they're in here is that this is the place for debating. So again, I'd like the Minister for Environment to explain why the amendment was worded in such a way that it would, if accepted, prevent a debate on the divestment and the fracking issues. On that point, I know some people have already started debating Deputy Ward's amendment, which I think is a shame because this is a debate on the amendment to the amendment. We need to be very clear about that. I'd like to answer the Constable of St Saviour, and I think actually the Assistant Minister for Energy, with responsibility for energy, actually kind of answered him back in some way, in that he was talking about, you know, if we divest from fossil fuels, we all need those fuels to heat our homes, you know, what we're going to do. Well, actually, if we divest in fossil fuels, what that then will lead to is new investment in more renewable energy, which then is actually cheaper. So it's actually a good thing. I do not want to debate too much on the amendment because I hope we get the chance to debate that full amendment. It's a really important amendment to debate. So the other bit about democracy, and I think it's an important point to make, is that the Minister for Environment seemed to be debating actually the amendment, not the amendment to the amendment. And in that, he accused, I think, I need to be careful to remain parliamentary here, Deputy Ward of, or he talked about shouting from the sidelines. Now again, back to the democracy and this chamber. We are all equal in this chamber. None of us are shouting from the sidelines. Any of us have the opportunity to bring an amendment, and as part of our democracy, those amendments should be debated. They should not be the subject to wrecking amendments, which is what I think this is, and that is exactly why we need to reject this amendment to the amendment and have the debate in full.
Deputy Andrews.
Thank you, sir. Having looked at the amendment to the amendment, I do believe that the Council of Ministers are potentially a bit sceptical in terms of how Jersey would be in the world of geopolitics. I think when we're looking at internationalism, we're looking at governments and the relationships that governments have with one another. And I think in particular when we're looking at, say, capital inflows compared to capital outflows, I think there is potentially this risk that they believe there is, where there would be capital outflow, so in terms of capital leaving the island as a result of this amendment being passed. However, I think we have to be proactive, we have to also be leading, and also we have to really be embracing the green economy too. And I think with Deputy Ward, I commend him for bringing this amendment before the Assembly, and I will be supporting him. I have to say that, of course, there will be several aspects that need to be covered in terms of when we're looking at oversight, in terms of the behaviour of some of the financial service firms in particular who are based in Jersey. And I think this is really what the amendment was looking at more. Of course, it's quite implicit in terms of how it was wording, but it was more about the behaviour of financial service firms instead of just domestically incorporated businesses in the island. And of course, you know, when we're looking at regulation and enforcement, that is potentially an extension to the amendment in terms of what would also need to be discussed further, I think, in terms of if anything is going to be brought back to the Assembly in future. But when we are looking at the world of globalisation, yes, potentially there is the risk that some firms may decide to offshore. However, as an island, if we can actually be at the forefront of embracing the green economy, I think there will be many in the international system who will actually be embracing Jersey for the stance that we have taken. And I think actually many would be understanding of us as a legislature for actually introducing new measures and modern measures as well. And I don't think we should be sceptical too much, because actually we need to be leading the way, and it's all about where private capital investment will be heading in the future, and that is really to do with green finance. Therefore, we will be seeing disinvestment in this current area as it is, but it's really just looking at the rate of how soon that disinvestment will materialise. And even speaking to Deputy Gorst in a public hearing last week, he mentioned the importance of embracing green finance. But I think really when we're looking at the original amendment, I think the wording should be maintained. I think the amendment to the amendment, unfortunately, does not really target the amendment fairly. And I think actually there is quite a lot of content that really has not been mentioned. And also there's probably been a lack of constructive feedback to the amendment. So that's where I stand on that, sir. Thank you.
very much, Deputy. Deputy Southern.
Thank you, sir. Let's just go back a little and examine what we're debating today. We're debating the common strategic policy. Note the word strategic. What does that do? That gives us a direction, a general push, a move towards. It's a gentle amendment, and yet the Environment Minister spent most of his speech talking about we need the detail. No, we don't. We need the detail elsewhere, sometime later. We need the detail maybe in the government plan. We don't need the detail, and nobody else is insisting on detail anywhere else in the Common Strategic Plan, the CSP. And then I started thinking, where have I heard this sort of argument before? And I have. And it's the classic, how to kill a backbench proposition. You can either, one, accuse it of having too much detail and being wrong, and getting this wrong, that wrong, and other, because there's too much detail in there, or you can accuse it of having not enough detail. And what we had here today from the Environment Minister was not enough detail in this, and we need all the detail in the strategic plan. No, we don't. We need to set the direction, take the first couple of steps towards that direction, and let it work out. And that doesn't mean, and what it means is that we can safely vote for all the three areas contained in Deputy Ward's amendment, because the amendment from the ministers actually limits our action. This, with three elements, does not in any way limit any action or any initiatives or any discussions and debates with disinvesting in particular areas or another. So all three options are perfectly safe. And then we come to, I want to call him Senator. That's that Deputy Ozeff's contribution. And what we got here was the third way of wrecking somebody's backbench amendment, which is to scaremonger it. Okay, all of a sudden, we got, and I do apologise, my face may have shown some emotion when I was listening to the Deputy's speech, and I do apologise for interrupting him. But he's scaremongering. Absolutely. All of a sudden, we got this short-term actions. We're trying to do things suddenly, instantly, and that's dangerous. We are switching off the power instantly, we are told. Are we? Of course we're not. It's almost as if Deputy Ozeff is in some parallel universe where big issues can be solved with a magic wand, where we can suddenly make everything right because actually what we're listening to is someone who wants to be king of the world, basically. And scaremongering to the extent that he did was absolutely out of the question. And where he ended up was, this is not deliverable and not sustainable, and instant reaction will cause chaos. In other words, do as little as possible. Do nothing. When you analyse the speech that Deputy Ozeff gave, it was do as little as possible, do nothing. Things will work out as it is. And that's exactly what's going wrong with COP27, not 22 or 23. I wondered when you were going to get to 27. You did eventually. COP27. So on lots of grounds, I don't think we should be getting rid of the three options, which are perfectly safe, and going for the one option from the amendment to the amendment. So please support the three arms of this amendment as it currently stands by Deputy Ward and vote against reducing what we've got in front of us.
Deputy Hull.
Thank you, sir. I think we are all keen on a better way forward. We are all we're aiming for carbon neutrality, but it's not easy. And currently, we cannot completely stop our reliance on fossil fuels. So I support the Minister for the Environment and the Assistant Minister for the Environment, and I think we should be supporting their amendment to this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment? Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I have listened very carefully to the arguments that have been raised, and I have a concern. It might be because I'm a new member of the States Assembly, but there seems to be suggestion that this amendment is a wrecking amendment. And I'm trying to understand perhaps a bit more, perhaps because of my relative ignorance as a new member, what's going on. Whenever anybody amends an amendment, that might be regarded as a wrecking amendment, because as far as I understand, when I read an amendment to amendment, I'm being invited to debate whether the amendment of the amendment is actually improving it. It means that I should actually look at the intent of the original amendment and its merits and actually consider whether the amendment is improving it. I'm very much aware that the Common Strategic Policy is a very high-level document that lacks on detail, and that the States Assembly have got plenty of opportunity to bring more propositions, work out the detail as we go along. But I'm also aware of the merits and the efforts of green finance generally, and the efforts that I already have seen that have taken place in the finance industry to address such issues, including greenwashing. So I remain of the view that the Council of Ministers attempt to point a way forward for us, bearing in mind the complexity of the issues, and a very serious issue in terms of supporting not just carbon neutrality, but moving towards net zero. I'm satisfied that they have actually given it proper thought. Thank you.
Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. It's a shame there's not more ministers in here to listen. So I was surprised, and I will talk about this amendment to the amendment, and I may have to repeat myself, but I'm afraid that's the nature of the beast. I was surprised when this amendment was accepted for debate. It changes the entire wording of my amendment and removes entirely 2 areas for debate and vote from this Assembly. I say to Deputy Scott, that's why it's a wrecking amendment. It removes your right to vote on 2/3 of the amendment from a backbencher. The ruling given the amendment, and I read it again because it's important that we have it, the amendment from the Council of Ministers would not in its terms, if adopted, make any decision on fossil fuels and about fracking. The most that is said with these questions may be, the most that could be said was these questions may form part of green finance, but would not necessarily do so. The amendment, if adopted, would in effect negate the first 2 parts of Amendment 5, but would provide a valid amendment to the 3rd part that is about sustainable future. It negates 2/3. You will lose your right to vote on it. And further, it would perhaps have been better if the amendment specified that it was dealing with the last part of Amendment 5 only and leave the other 2 parts to the Assembly. I will repeat that. It would be perhaps have been better, it would have been better, a better way, we're hearing a lot about that, if the amendment specified that it was dealing with the last part of the amendment only and leave the other 2 parts to the Assembly. It did not do this, and no attempt was made to contact me or discuss the change. There's collaborative, what's the word? It's not collaborative, it's the other word that you use. there's another one. Oh, you've forgotten it already. Don't worry about that. Plus, it was lodged late. Again, if it had, I would have accepted. If it had just accepted the first two parts and wanted to amend the third, I would have accepted the amendment because it's saying the same thing. There was no problem with it. The issue with this amendment to the amendment is it removes the debate on the key areas. So this is a poorly written amendment with consequences for the debate which have not been thought through. This may not be intentional, but we are still here discussing it. Good leadership includes knowing when you are making an error and acting on that error. I hope that ministers, members of the government and states members can consider that when they vote on this amendment to the amendment. It is accompanied by a comments paper, which I hope you have read, the amendment to the amendment, that is full of questionable statements. I will detail some of these. Number one, the comments paper says, currently, the international community does not apply a negative screening policy to industries with heavy CO2 footprint. At the end of May 2022, it was reported the energy and environment, this is the response to that, the energy and environment ministers from all G7 countries agreed that at a meeting in Berlin on Friday to end taxpayer funding for oil, gas and coal projects overseas, shifting around $33 billion, £26 billion a year from fossil fuels to clean energy sources, according to an analyst's estimates. There's an example. On the 3rd of November 2021, earlier, it was reported that more than 20 countries and financial institutions will halt all financing for fossil fuel development overseas and divert the spending to green energy instead from next year. So it is happening. What is in the comments paper is simply not factually true. Next point, Reuters reported the United States, Canada and 18 other countries committed to, at COP27 Climate Summit on Thursday, to stop public financing for fossil fuel projects abroad by the end of the year and steer their spending into clean energy instead. De-investing in fossil fuels, acting on it. It is not something that we will do alone. Please note the two prongs of this action, the ending of investment in fossil fuels and the changing to green financing, two separate areas that need to be discussed together. This amendment to the amendment ends the opportunity for us to do that in this assembly and is another reason why it should be rejected. Further in the report says, while the language adopted in the proposed amendment was that of the 2021 Citizens' Assembly recommendation to government, which informed its ambitions and policies for carbon neutral roadmap, COM concluded it was more appropriate to adopt the government's existing ambition and commitment made in Financial Services Policy Framework, which published last year. This reduces any public perception that the government is prepared to listen to islanders and voters if they willfully ignore direct recommendations by the Citizens' Assembly, after all the effort that went into constituting and running that last year. And from a government that is priding itself on public engagement, another reason to reject this amendment to the amendment. The report to the Citizens' Assembly on the climate change says, by 2025, the government will position Jersey as a sustainable finance hub by using incentives to attract sustainable finance for companies and entrepreneurs. This will be backed up by a strong regulatory system, annual audits to prevent greenwashing. And the government of Jersey should lead by example in regard to green finance by avoiding climate negative loans and investments. Fossil fuel investments and fracking are the ultimate in climate negative investments. But we are in danger of removing the subject from discussion in this Assembly and this amendment. You will not be allowed to vote on it. You will not be allowed to discuss it. The Financial Services Framework, which the government prefers, has its second strategic priority to enable Jersey to be a leading international finance centre for sustainable finance. How is this different from the recommendation of the Citizens' Assembly? So the amendment proposed by government does little that is new and not controversial. The difficult area of fossil fuel and fracking investment is being ducked. Where is our leadership on climate change here? The report says, and let's get back to this chicken licking politics, where the sky will fall in, which we've seen so often and is a classic tactic to undermine a backbencher's proposition. The report says the disruption to energy markets caused by the Russian invasion of Ukraine has emphasised the need for caution in implying any negative screening policy. There are two types of sustainability at stake. First are the unsustainable effects of carbon fuel emissions on climate and biodiversity, but second, economic sustainability in terms of burst bubbles and stranded assets. While the Ukraine war has provided a financial bonanza for some fossil fuel companies, and it's certainly done that, this is not sustainable nor desirable and should not be encouraged by any responsible government. Now is the time to dive. Now is, okay. Now, Antonio Guterres, I can't say, I do apologise. Antonio Guterres, as the UN General Secretary, who I think we should be listening to a little, perhaps as much as the Environment Minister, you make your choice. As current events make all too clear, our continued reliance on fossil fuels makes the global ecology and energy security vulnerable to geopolitical shocks and cries. And he goes on to say, instead of slowing down the decarbonisation of the global economy, now is the time to accelerate the energy transition to a renewable future. So right from the very top, we're saying, make your choices. Act now. Don't wait. So on these points, the arguments made in the accompanying report are at best selective and at worst simply finding ways to intellectualise our way from taking positive action to promote the divestment in fossil fuels and fracking. And I've got to say the speeches delivered by the Environment Minister would have been very at home at COP27. The States of Jersey manages the public funds of islanders. These fossil fuel investments are becoming increasingly risky as the cost of extraction increases and international treaties restrict the use of such fossil fuels. Not only does it make moral sense not to invest in the industry that is driving the production of greenhouse gases, but it makes financial sense. But by divesting from fossil fuels, the States of Jersey will join New York City, public institutions such as the British Medical Association, Glasgow University, Oxford City Council, amongst others, in leading by example to help create a sustainable future into the citizens of Jersey and beyond. And that wrapped with the parts at the beginning of my speech about large economies that are already moving in this way, shows that the fear-mongering about us doing this is simply unfounded. But we will be missing an opportunity. If we accept this amendment, we will be debating only the issue of green finance, which I believe we all know is not really an issue to debate, only agreement. We all know that is the way forward, and I support the government in these moves. It's not the area that we need to debate. But by accepting this amendment, we remove the debate on divesting in fossil fuels and ending fracking. And if you don't think that, then I'm afraid that you've not read the ruling I've read it to you, the ruling from the bailiff. I think we all need to pay into the rules in this assembly, and I'm willing to do that. And I'm the one who was at the end of what I thought was a terrible decision. But there we go. I accept that decision because that's what we've done. I won't remind you again of the amendment from the Council of Ministers, but not in terms, if adopted, make any decision about fossil fuels or fracking. Sorry, I've just done that. Now is the time for this debate, the full debate, at the start of a new assembly, with a government that has promoted its own commitment to addressing climate change, and many who have been elected on issues of green policy, that has created a Minister for Energy, and with an Environment Minister that was elected on a very green platform. Now is the time for the wider debate, not to stifle that debate, not to say we don't want to talk about it. You can vote against it, but you have to put your credentials on the table and vote against it. Not just shy away from it and say, well, it's okay because we talked about sustainable finance. We don't need to talk about investment and so on. We can ignore that. And you can raise your eyebrows and shift as much as you want, but that's where we are. And I wonder why that's why some people are shifting in their chairs at the moment. I believe that we can lead the way across both small jurisdictions and bat way above our average in the world community by sending the right signals. Signals that are right environmentally, that are right economically, and show a moral leadership that will promote Jersey across the world. Armed with these decisions, on the full debate, we can send our ministers to the next COP, COP28 with real policies in their laptop bags and be influenced way beyond our size. So we've had so much talk about the crises we formed. This, well, if we ever get to it, the full amendment does not give a timescale because it is, as was mentioned by Deputy Southern, the common strategic policy. The policy that we will adopt to send out a message to investors to say, we don't want you investing in fossil fuels and fracking. We want our economy to be clean, green, lean, and work for everybody and look to the future. We want to say to the Youth Assembly, we're taking this seriously and we're looking to your future. And we're not going to say, we'd like to do it, but you know what? We've got an emergency, but we can't quite deal with that emergency yet. It's an emergency that we'll put on, if you excuse the pun, the back burner. And we'll leave it there. And why the back's on the back burner? We'll emit more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and when we have no chance of 1.5. And if you want chicken licking politics and you want to talk about catastrophe, if we go beyond 1.5 degrees, that is a catastrophe that we cannot even imagine. And it won't come to us first, it will go to other poor communities. And then we'll be debating, what are we going to do with mass migration? What are we going to do from those who are economic and climate change migrants? Because what we did on the, whatever it is, the date, 23rd of November, we said, well, now let's not talk about divesting in fracking and divesting in fossil fuels. We can talk about green economies. Now's not the time to do it because we face a difficult winter and we've got to keep the oil companies keeping their massive profits going. That's okay. We can do that instead. You're on the wrong side of history by denying this. But to be on the right side of history, it takes really courageous decisions. And one of those, how courageous is it just to say, we'll have the debate? We can't even make that decision. I urge you to reject the amendment to the amendment, have the full debate on fracking, on investment in fossil fuels and the genuine debate, and then come back. And if you don't want to vote for it, don't vote for it. But by voting for the amendment to the amendment, you lose your right to vote on that amendment. That is why it's a wrecking amendment. And I urge you, please, reject the amendment to the amendment and let's get on with a proper debate in this Assembly and not stifle ourselves at a time of climate emergency. Thank you, sir.
Honourable St Mary.
Thank you, sir. I make the general point. I am concerned at the nature of this debate. I think most of us in the chamber approve, support the idea of lack of investment in fossil fuels in the future. And some of the comments made suggest there is a big gulf between sides. I don't think there is. It is essentially the way this has gone forward. As we've been reminded, we are debating a policy document. We've also been reminded that it's not a time where we should be putting in the detail, but the amendment of Deputy Ward does contain detail, and that, I think, is the cause of the problem. When I originally read that amendment, I wasn't sure whether the aim was to impose restrictions or not restrictions, but advice to local businesses as far as running their own businesses concerned locally. Clearly, from the comments made, it tended to go beyond that. So if that amendment was accepted, we are, I think as the Environment Minister pointed out, effectively telling local investment fund managers, and I say local, these are branches of international fund managers, what they should be doing, where they should be investing. Most of these have their own ethical committees. They are acutely aware of the world in which we live. And I'm not sure it is right, and it ill behoves Jersey to take this course of telling people for whom we rely on our income how they should be going about their business. That is my chief concern. That is not to say we should not be encouraging such matters. We shall be, and I rely on the ministerial team to put those encouragements and incentives in place in the future. As to the nature of the debate, whether this is a wrecking amendment, I don't quite see it in that light. We have the amendment as proposed by Deputy Ward has three branches to it. The amendment to the amendment knocks out two of them, and we are here in a position to decide whether it is right to do so at this stage. You won't rule out future debate, and I think that there is too much detail in Deputy Ward's debate, which I do not think reflects well on the Assembly if we pass them as they're set out. So I do rely on the advice and speech given by the Environment Minister that these are matters that we are in the course of attending to already. They will be gone into in much greater detail at the time, and there then is the time to look at the actual detail. But here, I think the word was sweeping words. They are. The amendment, so I'll clarify, Deputy Ward's amendment is in such a way that they are sweeping. They may offend local businesses, they may offend our reputation, and for that reason I shall be supporting the amendment to the amendment. Thanks, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment? Deputy Meze.
Thank you, sir. I don't have that many notes in front of me, and I honestly don't really know what I'm going to say in this, because I am so overcome by anger at the situation we are in because of the way that this amendment, I think, encapsulates the great betrayal that we are visiting upon succeeding generations. It is a betrayal that can be broken down into three tiers, I think. The first of those tiers is the global betrayal. The fact that we have these lovely conferences, we have COP, we have the Paris Agreement, we have all of those others which frankly don't go far enough and are not putting us on the footing which we need to be to avert the catastrophe which is heading towards this planet if we don't deal with man-made climate change. The second tier is the local tier. That we are facing a government which cannot even bring itself to put on record its reconciliation of the fact that not only is fracking environmental vandalism, but it is a moral atrocity because of what it does to our environment and what it will do to the communities who live near where it occurs in other places around the world. But the thing I think that hurts the most, sir, is the third betrayal, the third tier of the betrayal, which is that this comes from individuals who I perhaps naively thought knew better on this. Sir, we have heard some lovely words in this, and I made a note of one because it stuck with me so much. The Environment Minister said, be an inspirational example of change, when this amendment makes sure that we do nothing of the sort. And you can just look at some of the wording that's in the report on this. And one of the criticisms it makes of Deputy Ward's amendment, it says, the amendment as worded goes beyond the scope of the island's domestic commitment to becoming carbon neutral and net zero by 2050. Firstly, we know that the 2050 deadline is too late. Anybody who's actually thinking about this and looking at the evidence knows that. But that's how we're meant to be an inspirational example, sir. It's to go no further than commitments which we've just about secured that themselves don't go far enough. How very inspirational to say that we will simply do no more than the absolute bare minimum. It further on goes on to say, it also goes further than the commitments made by the international community under the Paris Agreement. Again, sir, how does that demonstrate any form of leadership to say we'll do nothing more than what everyone else is doing, and what everyone else is doing within a framework which frankly isn't good enough? We're told to show, not tell. We have nothing to show for if that's the way that we approach this. Sir, we did have from Deputy Joseph the kinds of speeches that I remember from his previous service in this Assembly, which are very excitable, and isn't that wonderful? but are ultimately based on fear-mongering to scare members into voting against an amendment on the bases of things which actually it doesn't ask us to do. So the wording of Deputy Ward's amendment, which will be removed from this if this amendment succeeds, talks about to actively promote and action the disinvestment from fossil fuel-linked investments from Jersey-linked businesses. That is not to say, bang, tomorrow, it's all gone. It's to actively promote and action it. That takes time. That can be done in a rational way if we choose to do so. That can take into account all of the economic concerns that there may or may not be. We can do that in the way that is most appropriate, as long as that is the direction of travel. And we ultimately we have no choice. That has to be the direction of travel. Even if climate change weren't happening, fossil fuels are non-renewable, they will run out one day, so that will have to happen irrespective of that. But the fact that it is the cause of the climate crisis and the devastation that that is beginning to cause and which will get worse, and all of the effects that has, not just on the world, but on Jersey, as we face worse weather conditions, our own resilience will be tested, as we won't be able to get food coming into the island, because we don't have on island food security. How many days of no deliveries into the island does it take before people in Jersey face real hardship? And something that Deputy Ward alluded to as well, the effects of mass migration as a result of climate change will be felt by Jersey, and we see the abhorrent way that migrants fleeing from war situations are treated. I have little hope that it'll be any better when they're fleeing from environmental catastrophes instead. So it is complete fear-mongering to say that Deputy Ward's amendment, unamended, does something overnight that's going to harm the island. It simply doesn't do that, and it is a shame to make that point when that clearly is not the wording that's before us. We can plan for that. And I have to say, I don't buy the concerns that are in the report to the amendment about the economic impact it could have and how it may impact on the vulnerable. For a start, as Deputy Coles so brilliantly put it in his speech, I thought, much of the adversity being faced by the vulnerable that we see near our shores anyway, is primarily caused by the greed of the businesses that are providing energy to those households. We see that in the UK, where they've made massive profits because of the wider economic circumstance, money which goes into the pockets of shareholders when it could be better placed actually subsidising those who are facing that vulnerability. I saw a great quote recently saying, we often refer to these people who are economically vulnerable as vulnerable, when actually we probably should use the correct word for them, which is that they're oppressed. They're not vulnerable, they're oppressed. That's what this is if we're not making decisions which are in their interests based on the obscene profits that are being made out of the fossil fuel trade. But, sir, what this amendment does, which I think we ought to put it in its most simple terms, and I know this will annoy ministers, but they have no right to be annoyed from it because it's true, which is we want to send a message out there, come to Jersey, where we are a leading financial centre in sustainable and green finance, so bring your funds for renewable energy development here to Jersey. Oh, and whilst you're coming, you can bring your fracking as well. What hypocrisy that is. Absolute hypocrisy. And that message will be noted. It will mean that we do not stand out as genuine players for genuine green finance. It will be noted as double standards and hypocrisy, and frankly, it will be opportunistic, seeking to portray us as some kind of moral and environmental leader when we can't even accept a couple of lines in a strategic plan, so not even the detail, not even core actions which the government must immediately take to undertake this, but those high-level proposals to actively promote and action the disinvestment from fossil fuel and adopt a policy of opposing investment in fracking. Beneath that, the detail is completely negotiable, and we can do that in the way that's best for Jersey, that's least disruptive, but which accepts the facts underpinning that, which are that fossil fuel industry is destroying our climate and will lead to devastating impacts around the world, and to accept that fracking is both environmental vandalism and a moral atrocity because of how it affects those nearby communities. And if this amendment is accepted, we don't even get to resolve on those 2 points. That is why I regard it as a wrecking amendment, because I think that the record of this assembly in having opposed those 2 bullet points would be inevitably one of embarrassment, especially when it stands in such stark contrast to the words that come from those proposing this amendment to the amendment. It would be an embarrassing record, and by proposing this amendment to it, it conveniently deprives that record of being clear on the Assembly website and elsewhere. Sir, if I were behind that, I would not have a clean conscience, and because I want to keep my conscience clean, despite the utter despair I feel at how those in charge, not just locally but around the world, are failing succeeding generations, I will certainly not vote for this amendment to the amendment. And I was moved listening to what Deputy Feltham said about the words of her daughter. There is nothing like the wisdom of a child to cut through the nonsense. And that was very powerful, and we're letting those generations down by not taking the action we need.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment? Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir. It doesn't really give me pleasure to stand in the debate because of the turn that it has taken. And I think we really have heard a great deal of political rhetoric this morning. And what disappoints me, I suppose, is that we've not just heard rhetoric, but we've heard veering towards personal comments and attacks. And I think that is really is unfair and unbecoming of this assembly. I don't believe that there is any intention of betrayal, and I really do want to echo the words of my constituency constable when he spoke about coming together and agreeing and delivering change in that regard. Because there will, sir, and there is and has been for the course of the morning, a debate on these matters. And it is important that there is a debate on these matters. And this debate now is whether members wish to accept and support the amendment to the amendment, or they wish to have a further debate and vote on the amendment. But there is a vote, and that vote is in the hands of members. And therefore, it surprises me that some speakers have suggested that there isn't a choice and that there isn't a vote, because there quite clearly is. And members will be required to make a decision. That decision may not be easy, because the issue that we are talking about, for all of the reasons that a number of members have raised, itself isn't easy. It was right that we in this assembly declared, along with many countries around the globe, a climate emergency. If we're absolutely honest with ourselves, so that was the easy bit. The difficult bit is then putting into action in a way that delivers change, that desire to see change. This is a strategic document, and we always in the Assembly struggle with the difference between strategy and detailed action plans, and from time to time we slip over and want to put detailed actions into a strategic document. The reason that I think that this is difficult, i.e. putting more detailed actions into a strategic document, is because it's not clear we're making a detailed action, that we're not clear how we can give effect to, but we would be saying that our policy is disinvestment from fossil fuels linked to investments from Jersey-linked businesses. And this really is where, again, the constable from my constituency hit the nail on the head, and the difficulties that there is with that. We would be, as some members have said, it's important that we send a message. And of course it is important that messages are sent. But it's equally as important when we send a message that we understand fully what that message is and what the implications of that message is. Because there are very short-term issues which we need to make decisions on. So we have agreed that there is a climate emergency, and indeed there is. But we also, I think, are agreed that there is an energy crisis and a cost of living crisis. And it is important that we are mindful of the interplay in the short term of those two issues, and that we aren't on the one hand saying one thing and on the other doing something different because of the short-term crises in energy. And not only is there that challenge of the short-term crisis in energy, which we know that our colleagues across Europe are really struggling with. What is the source of energy that they use arising because of the war in Ukraine? How do they keep their factories open? How do they make the decisions between keeping their industry functioning and providing energy to their citizens? And there are no easy answers, and there are decisions which are having to be made which might seem counter to the declaration of a climate emergency. And it is important that we in this Assembly think rationally about the decisions and the messages that we are sending, particularly when it comes to issues around disinvestment and fossil fuel linked investments. What does that mean for the trust industry? Where does the duty of trustees lie? Where are the duties of administrators? Where is the duty of the regulator? What is the desired actions of the External Relations Minister and Minister for Financial Services? All of these are actions which are being undertaken by relevant ministers, partnership between relevant ministers. And I turn to the words of the, I'm going to use the term Assistant Minister for Environment because that's the one I can remember, but her role is so much more than that. And I was really pleased to see all of the work that she was doing at COP27 in a difficult environment. But surely, sir, we in an assembly and in an island that has always prided ourselves on being outward-looking and a trading nation, and criticised those who are insular and inward-looking. We, of all places, have to have hope and put vigour into multilateralism. It has served us well as an island. It has served our island as well. It has served our economy well. And so we might feel frustrated with some of these multilateral organisations, but we are far better to be joined with them, and we are far better to make our case, and not just make our case in conversation, as the Environment Minister said, not just have words without meaning, but to be able to talk about what we have actually done. And ministers are, and he is actually getting on and doing things, and we'll see that more and more. And that, for me, is why, sir, I can't support Deputy Ward's amendment. I do support the amendment coming from the Environment Minister with the support of the External Relations and Financial Services Minister. And I think that that gives us a very sound and strong strategic direction upon which we can move forward. And I will, as all members do, explain that decision in all good conscience. Because right now we find ourselves in a global situation that we find ourselves in, and we must be cognizant of that in our decision making. So there is a vote. You will call it shortly once the Minister is summed up. It is not undemocratic to have an amendment to an amendment. That is how this Assembly and all democratic parliaments work. Members make their choice and cast their vote. And as I say, I will be confidently and with hope casting my vote for the amendment to the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and I rise to follow the Deputy. I just want to say to members, sir, that I'm clear about what I'm voting on today, and as Deputy Gorse has just said, the big debate on Deputy Ward's amendment is being had now, because this is now the time to have it. So if you have something to say, this is the debate to have it in, and if you, that's what you should be doing. So consequently, I've listened hard to both sides of the arguments, and I've heard truths on both sides. There's no doubt there are implications to immediately disinvesting in carbon and oil and gas and stopping fracking. But I also agree that the younger generation are not being heard here. I get berated regularly by young people who say that I'm far too old to be making a decision on this, and it's their generation that are ones who will suffer the consequences of what I decide, and I should take more notice of them. One word I just picked out in the debate so far, sir, is transition. And it's clear to me this is a debate on how fast we transit, and members will have to make up their own minds. If I might misquote Shakespeare, sir, the deputy, in my mind, doth protest too much, methinks. I believe that in the Minister for the Environment that we have currently, he's as green an Environment Minister that we've had for some time, and I include myself in that. But I will vote with him on this amendment to the amendment and go along with his proposed strategy. I think his is the right way to move forward. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment? No other member wishes to speak? Then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Reniff to respond.
Thank you, sir. It's been quite difficult to listen to some of that, I must say. There's been some quite strong accusations. And I'm sorry, I regret, in fact, that the debate has taken this turn. I prefer to see this as a situation where we have honest disagreements about the exact strategy to pursue. And I want to take on very directly the points that have been made, because I think they merit attention, they merit a proper response. So, if members will excuse me, I'll go through them. Deputy Tadia accused me of neutrality when the planet is in danger. No, sir, I am not neutral. I very clearly said that I wanted to take action. I want to send a message to the rest of the world, but I want to do it on the basis of action. Action that we can take. Action over which we have control. Action, not words. I tried to point out, the kind of knots that we might tie ourselves in if we try and promote disinvestment at a time when we still need fossil fuels ourselves in Jersey. If there's hypocrisy, which I was also accused of, then it would come from urging disinvestment whilst continuing to depend on fossil fuels. I noticed that Deputy Tadia and others didn't deal with the detailed points I made. I say to the Deputy and to my environmental friends in St. Brillard and elsewhere that the world is a complicated place. The short term is different from the longer term. Leadership is facing uncomfortable truths. I'm not for fracking. In the short term, I say again, there is no alternative for some countries. Let us show some understanding. It does not mean we support fracking. Indeed, our support for green finance will explicitly support investment in the transition we know we need to make. But to campaign against it will not show leadership, except to those who already agree with us. Deputy Coles mentioned that we were greenwashing on a turbo cycle. I'm grateful for clarification which came from him and from others that they believe we should disinvest from Shell or companies like that. Fine, that's a clear position. But where does the finance from green energy come from then? Are we really saying that we will only accept green investment if it comes from some non-oil company? Shell, Total, Gunvor, they're all heavily investing in biofuels. I made this point, it was not addressed. Are we really saying, no, we don't want that investment because we think it's greenwashing? No, thank you. I say again, the world is a complex place. I accept that some of the vital investment we need to fund the transition will come from fossil fuel incumbents. Deputy Feltham referred to her child and to the next generation. And the point was picked up by others. I too have children, too. And I do talk about these issues with them. And I get the passion too. But you know, there's one thing which I was taught when I went to school, and it's something which I try and promote with my children and try and talk to them about. And that is, I try and talk to them about the complexity of issues. I try and say to them, yes, there are moral imperatives in the world, but there is also complexity in the world. And that, I think, is what I've tried to bring to this debate, to try and point out that it is relatively easy for us to stand and say we're against something. It is harder for us to actually do something. There's been a lot of talk about us trying to stifle debate. I think Deputy Luce had it absolutely right, and others also made this point. This is the debate. If we had not brought this amendment, I would have made exactly the same speech, but in answer to the Deputy's amendment. What we did, and I accept, maybe it was a mistake, but we thought it was good to try and build on the parts of the Deputy's amendment with which we agreed. If that was a mistake, then forgive me for my procedural novice status in this assembly. Deputy Southern said that this was a case where we didn't need the detail. My point is not that we need the detail. It is that there are too many contradictions in Deputy Ward's amendment for it to work. So in response to Deputy Ward's point, he said that our amendment negates 2/3. Yeah, that's right. And that's the debate we're having. That's the debate we've had throughout the last couple of hours. We've talked about all the elements that were in Deputy Ward's amendment. We have not cut off debate. We have not stifled anything. We have I've made all the points that I would have made about that amendment, and so have others. So have members of Reform, so have others who have supported that amendment. There has been no stifling of debate here at all. And finally, Deputy Mezek accuses me of betrayal. I beg to differ, you won't be surprised to hear. I think we can be inspirational in this island. Inspirational because we commit to real change. Not to talk, but to action. It is not action to say that we promote disinvestment. Those are words. We have no powers to make that happen. We can control what we do in this island. We can build up our green finance. We can give that strong direction, and we can make an energy transition in this island where we sweat the details. We work on showing the rest of the world how it can happen in practice, something which nobody else has yet managed. We haven't done enough yet. That's where I want our efforts to be on climate change. I want our efforts to be on becoming that global exemplar. That is how we inspire the next generation. I will have no problem at all in coming to talk to the Youth Assembly to explain why I have taken the stance I have on this. I think it's a principled stance. I think it makes sense. I think it works with Jersey's greatest strengths. So please support the amendment to the amendment, and please, after this debate, let's try and come back together and try and move forward together to achieve the change we all know we need to achieve. Thank you.
Is the appel called for? Well, ask members to return to their seats. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. The vote is on the amendment to the amendment. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been adopted, 34 votes pour, 13 votes contre, no abstentions.
Give the 13, please.
Those members voting contre, the Connétable of Grouville and Deputy Southern, Tadier, Lehegara, Rob Ward, Alves, Mezek, Coles, Porre, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Kovac and Andrews.
So can we have the others, please?
Those members voting for. The Connétable St Helier, St Brelard, Trinity, St Peter, St Martin, St John, St Mary and St Saviour, and Deputies Labby, Lewis, Morell, Ayer, Gardner, Gorst, Farnham, Moore, Osoph, Balash, War, Miles, Scott, Renouf, Rose Binet, Jearn, Miller, Hal, Tom Binet, Ferry, Alex Curtis, Barbara Ward, Wilson and Stevenson, and the Connétable of St Lawrence and St Juan in the chat.
Very well. We now resume a debate on the Fifth Amendment, now amended by that amendment. It has been proposed and seconded. Does any other member wish to speak on it? If no other member wishes to speak, then I put the matter immediately to the vote. Is the appel called for, or do we do it on a stand? As called for, I invite the greffier to open the voting. The vote is on the Fifth Amendment as amended. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The Fifth Amendment as amended has been adopted. 47 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstentions. Very well. That concludes all of the amendments to the strategic policy, and we return to debate on the common strategic policy as amended throughout the last few debates. It has been proposed and seconded. Does any member wish to speak on the common strategic policy as amended? Deputy Tadier.
Thanks, sir. Members will accept my apologies, especially the movers of amendments and the Chief Minister who's bringing the proposition for not being here yesterday. I had my reasons for not being here due to health reasons. What I picked up, and I admit that I didn't follow, therefore, I didn't follow the debate that was going on, but I've picked up some clues as to the fireworks that happened in the last few days. And what really struck me is that I understand the reality, the realpolitik of this assembly. And I sent a message to my colleague, he won't mind me saying, hopefully, Deputy Coles earlier, because I needed to catch up on what the votes were. And I said, how did your vote go on the customer one? And he said, oh, we lost by one vote. And I immediately checked. And I was about to feel bad for not being here and realised that a tie vote wouldn't have been any better. It would have still lost. And I said, well, I thought to myself, doesn't that say it all? I mean, it shows that we've got the lowest common denominator that we've had during this entire debate, I suspect, is that we can't decide on whether our constituents, the people we were elected to serve, are customers or whether they're members of the public or constituents. And I think that sums up the whole approach of this government. We've taken a shift now where this is serious. Members might smile and laugh, and I don't know how anyone voted on that. I'll check subsequently. And I'm sure it divided people, not necessarily across the usual lines. But we have a government now that sees islanders as customers. What does that mean? It means that they're subjects of a business transaction. It means that the whole of this common strategic policy has at its centre not constituents or civilians or members of a community who are there not to be judged on what their worth is in terms of what they bring to the table and to the island and what they produce intellectually, culturally, etc., sir. And it means that this whole of the CSP that we have now puts at the centre of that proposal a commercial transaction. So, and I think the last amendment that I've just sat through and the counter to it shows that we know that the island was sold long ago, many years ago. It's been bought and sold to the highest bidder. We see that right across the island when we see our coastline being sold off and developed to the highest bidder. But unfortunately now we've also seen a continuation that this assembly has also been captured by those interests to the point where we're quite happy to say the majority in this assembly, yes, we're dealing with customers, not with the members of the public, sir. So for me, that says it all. I'll find out which way we'll be voting shortly. I'm sure there's some good stuff in this CSP, sir. But for me, that simply sums it up in the 21st century, in 2021, 22. Is it 2022 still? That knock on the head must have been quite bad when I came off my scooter. So for me, that sums it up. We've gone past the line, I think, sir, where we're now seeing people for what we can extract from them, including the earth in terms of what we can extract from it, and not what we can be doing in terms of the social contract, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. Jersey is a very special and unique place, and in no way is it more unique than in how we conduct our politics. We have a unique electoral system, we have a unique political dynamic which we can see repeated nowhere else in the world, and in two ways it is unique, but I would suggest not good, are in that we have still an undemocratic electoral system where the weight of your vote is determined by where you live, or what part of the island you live in, and the lack of a clear mechanism at the ballot box which enables voters to clearly say, this is the vision and the action plan which I want implemented by my government if the people who I vote for succeed. Instead, a majority of those who run for election run not with comprehensive and costed action plans, but with often laudable aims in their manifestos and broad statements about what approach they will take. And so we then face the unique situation after an election where the government takes months after it's formed to come up with its plan. In most other jurisdictions, what happens is a government is formed after an election either by a majority party or a coalition between parties who believe they can find enough common ground between them to come up with some plan in very short order that will guide how they act and seek to deliver as a government for their term of office. I've sometimes regarded the Common Strategic Policy as the sort of equivalent of a Queen's speech here, although we have to get used to calling it the King's speech now, where very soon after an election a programme is presented to Parliament, and if that Parliament were to vote against it, that would probably lead to the collapse of that government and the quick instatement of a new one to have another go at getting support for that. We have a much more drawn out process for doing that, and at its culmination we get a document like this Common Strategic Policy serving as our equivalent, setting out what the strategic priorities for this government's term of office will be. So I can feel comfortable voting against that plan, and that's not to be oppositional for the sake of it there, but it's to say that this plan may well be for that majority who have constructed it and are entitled to do so, but it is in law, it is the government's strategic plan. I don't serve in that government, and I have a manifesto, as do my colleagues, which has different priorities to it, different priorities which perhaps somewhere in an alternative reality are being pursued by a different formation of government. That, I think, is normal. It's normal for an elected member to say, I will vote according to my own democratic mandate and not the mandate of others who I am not necessarily aligned with. So when the Common Strategic Policy was first lodged, you and I had an indirect conversation, one that took place through officers, where we explored the possibility of bringing quite a comprehensive amendment to the CSP, which would have changed it quite drastically to reflect our manifesto, key priorities and action points within that. And you drew our attention to the law, which says that it's the government's strategic plan. It's not an alternative party's strategic plan, and that makes sense. So, of course, we accept that. But what we would have wanted to have voted on and signalled to those who have given us a democratic mandate to serve in this assembly is that we remain true to that document. We don't align ourselves with a document constructed after an election that didn't really have much of our input into it. So, sir, through this term of office, our position will be that we will remain true to the key priorities we set in advance of the election and for which we have a democratic mandate to seek out. Those key priorities are equality, sustainability, and accountability. There's fewer of them than are in this particular document, and they're tied to a more broad document, our election manifesto, which we think provides much greater clarity on where we stand on some very specific issues. We're clear in what we stand for when it comes to tax reform, sir. We want to see a tax system which is fairer and more progressive, which asks those who earn the most to pay more so that we can provide better quality and more far-reaching public services to support people in our society. We want to take much quicker and more drastic action in sustainability, in ensuring that our economy provides good, well-paid jobs for those who work in it, that we provide the best training opportunities possible, and that we move towards a green economy as quickly as possible. And in accountability, we want to see much more done to strengthen our government system on democratic lines to ensure that that we have things like equal votes, a separation of powers, and a civil service which is structured in such a way so that ministers are truly in control of it, rather than what has been the case recently. On where any of those policies or our headline priorities are aligned with the government, they will count on our collaboration on those. The Environment Minister put out a press release recently about the licensing scheme for rented dwellings. That was in our manifesto. It aligns with our priorities. When that comes to the Assembly, we will play a constructive role in hoping to see the passage of those regulations because that's in line with our democratic mandate. When the government brings forward policies which are not in line with our manifesto, they can expect our robust challenge and opposition if necessary. That will be the approach that we take, and we will vote always in accordance with the democratic mandate that we have from the public. That means that our door is open to work with others when they think there is room for collaboration, when our policies and priorities are aligned, and I hope that that will happen frequently and we'll be able to go back to the public and claim clear victories where we've been able to advance policies that will make their lives better. But it does not mean, under any circumstances, that our support can ever be taken for granted. It can't be. This common strategic policy, I wish the government best of luck in delivering those parts of it which are aligned with our democratic mandate. But it is not our document, it's not the mandate which we were elected on, a mandate which is based on a document created before the election, not after it. And so on that basis, we vote against the common strategic policy, but we will continue to play our full role in these 4 years in advancing where we have common ground and advancing the priorities which we set of equality, sustainability and accountability.
Beverly Stevens.
Thank you, sir. As I'm quickly learning is something of a tradition in this assembly, I'm going to say I wasn't sure I was going to speak at first, but actually Deputy Tadia encouraged me to, so thank you for that, Deputy. I just wanted to share with you that as an Assistant Chief Minister, I was present in one of the first meetings at which the Common Strategic Policy and how that would be shaped and informed was discussed. And the thing that really stood out to me was within minutes of sitting down and starting that discussion, multiple ministers had said community. The word community needs to be in there. And that really struck me. As somebody who stood for election because I felt that perhaps we'd missed that in the past a bit, and we'd missed the link with islanders, and I didn't often feel that our government was working for real everyday people. I felt that sometimes the economy word was put before people and community. So then we talked yesterday about how words do matter, and I think it was quite clear that actually regardless of which way you voted yesterday, we did agree that words do matter. So if we look at some of the words in this policy, we've got words like people, families, community, social mobility, equality, well-being, and yes, Deputy Mezek, accountability and sustainability are in there as well. Interestingly, that people does appear throughout the document, and I didn't speak yesterday, but as Deputy Tadia has kind of spoken to a little bit today, I do think it's really important that people was mentioned from the government point of view, and do take the point that customer was in there from the values. Words matter, and that really stood out to me. I've been encouraged by the words in this document, but also so far the actions of this government, and I just really wanted to stand up today to say that actually, hopefully with this document agreed by the Assembly and endorsed by the Assembly, I'm really positive for the future, both for the words, but actually the actions that can follow from this. Whether you call it a better way, progress, reform even, I actually think that as an island, we can be really positive about the future with a document like this behind us to work to get behind. Finally, before I sit down, I'd just like to say from a sports point of view, given my remit for sport, actually sport links with so many of these priorities that are in this document. I think that's really exciting for me and my role, but also for our island and our community. Thank you.
Very much, Deputy. Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. I'm honoured to follow the Assistant Chief Minister, Deputy Stevenson. Sir, the law in which this policy is being debated is Article 18(2)(e), which says the Council of Ministers shall have a function of agreeing and lodging for referral to one or more scrutiny panels established under standing order and approval by the state, a statement of their common strategic policy. I think we've had, as Deputy Stevenson alluded to, a really quite vigorous debate. We don't have party politics in Jersey in the majority. We effectively have a coalition. We've had a coalition of ministers working away, as Deputy Stevenson observed, that really had honest, pragmatic, sometimes feisty debates about what we wanted to put in for members' consideration. It moves, of course, from a Council of Ministers document, but what's the consequence, if I may respectfully say to Deputy Mezek, if every member who wasn't part, because we're a minority government, sir. Ministers don't have a majority, we're a minority government. What would happen, sir, if today we didn't get the common strategic policy? I think my reading of the law is the Council of Ministers would probably fall. It wouldn't exist. What we do in our unique system of democracy, which I am proud to advance, explain to people around the world in Westminster, we don't have whips, we have coming together. The Environment Minister, in his concluding remarks, said, let us come together. Let us come together on the things that we agree with. As I look at this document and I see the ambition led by a Chief Minister who certainly has had some feisty discussions with ministers, who certainly has had to find a collaborative way, a joined-up way in the way we do things. We don't always agree on things, of course we don't. But we have to find solutions. We have to find areas where we can actually deliver for the people that put us there. Our ambition, a place where people can afford a home, find good work, enjoy life, love, raise a family, stay active, healthy, and be financially secure throughout their life. A place that cares for its community, environment, culture, and heritage. A sustainable economy. We must face confident some of the biggest strategic challenges in recent times. The rising cost of living, climate change, global economic trends, the pace of technology. I asked members in their conclusions of whether or not to vote in favour of this common strategic policy to look at the document. I asked reform. Are they really going to vote against something that says we will deliver, build trust, accountability? That's one of their words, isn't it? Being prudent, focus on delivery, based on evidence-based, our workforce. I hear Deputy Southern say, how? How? By looking at our values, by being respectful, by working together, always trying to improve. Being whether or not it's customer or focused, we've decided that that's a matter for our staff, by being customer and people focused, and by delivering. Not action, not words, but action. Sorry, you got that the wrong way around, sir. Takes me a while. I would say to members, we have spent a long time dealing with a document, and I am proud to be back in this assembly, and I'm proud to be part of a Moore-led government, as it's known, outside, a coalition of different people from different backgrounds, determined, as the Deputy Southern jousted me to say, how? Look at the last page. Look at what the measurements are. If members want to debate further matters towards priorities, bring forward amendments in the government plan, otherwise known in my time as a budget. Actions need money. They need time of our public sector workers. If members wanted to change things, well, I think we've had a great debate actually on certain things. I think we're better for it. And I'm proud. I'm really proud, having been, as I've said, a member of this assembly for 7 of the last 8 governments. I think that this assembly, with the kind of speeches that we've heard, respectful speeches that we've heard from various deputies on my left, to various constables on my right, to various deputies to my rear, I think this assembly is great. I think it's really united in a way that I've never seen a number of assemblies before. I commend the Moore-led government common strategic policy, a coalition of strong-minded individuals who is determined to deliver. And I commend it to the Assembly and hope that it gets the members' support.
Very much, Deputy. Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. And I'd like to thank Deputy Stevens and Deputy Oza for their excellent words. This is a common strategic policy which, as Deputy Oza said, really should unite the Assembly. It is drawn from the manifestos of the individuals and the parties that are in this Assembly. It is been designed specifically to show that the government of Jersey is from the States Assembly, is drawn from the States Assembly, and that's what this common strategic policy is designed to do. You will, or members will, find many aspects of their own thinking and their own manifestos in here, regardless of whether or not they sat around the Council of Ministers table when it was being drawn up. And so I must admit, I am disappointed, and I'm a lot less magnanimous than Deputy Joseph. When I heard the tenor of the debate previous to this, when some members were quite clearly playing the person and not the ball. And it was disappointing in the extreme to hear that. And so I was also disappointed when I heard Deputy Mezek say, oh, our manifesto has different priorities. Really? Housing and cost of living, economy and skills, children and families, ageing population, health and well-being, environment, and, as Deputy Stevenson quite rightly showed, community. So, if reforms priorities are different to those 7, I'm disappointed, and that's a real shame, because I honestly thought those were priorities that reform shared with the government and the Council of Ministers. And quite correctly, sustainability and accountability are woven throughout this common strategic policy. I know in my own area, sustainability is a key word now in the economy department. It is how we think in the economy department. So I do ask members of Reform to understand that if they don't want to just be an opposition, if that's how they don't want to be seen, then I believe that they need to take on board a document which stands for many, many of the things that Reform stands for itself, and see that. Because to be tied to any one way of thinking forever means that you're not moving with the world. Ideologies don't work because they're unchanging. The world is constantly changing. Manifestos, sadly, even over a 4-year period, bits of them will need to change because reality changes around us. And so I do ask Reform, please put away the last debate and please stand up and say, no, this is a very good document. This does reach into the same priorities as the Reform Party has. And if it doesn't, then I think that's a real shame, because I am convinced that these 7 priorities for change are the 7 priorities for change that the island and islanders are demanding from us as an assembly. I heard on the doorsteps that the sense of community people felt was being lost in Jersey. They want that to be brought back. They are worried about the cost of living and the cost of housing. They are concerned about the future for an economy faced with staff shortages and global economic headwinds. They are concerned that children, particularly, are being priced out of futures in Jersey. They are concerned that with an ageing population, we have a situation where healthcare will become unaffordable. And so they are asking us to look at how we can change the delivery of health services and ensure that we have all a better sense of well-being in this island. And there is no question in my mind that there are very few islanders who don't want us to improve the environment. To me, that's one of the things that I think we should be so immensely proud of, is that Jersey is an environmentally minded island. I heard that on the doorsteps, not just this time, but 4 years ago as well. And then it brings us, the last one, back to that sense of community. I believe that Jersey's greatest strength lies in the strength of its community. We need to work together. We need to be together. We are 100,000 people. And I know so many times that feels like the whole world is just 100,000 people. But believe me, it's not. You know, when you travel to even cities, like Rennes, our nearest large city, Rennes, it's only 300,000 people. Yet we think of it as a small city. It's 3 times the size of us. And then you get to the big cities, the metropolises around the world, whether that's Mexico City or Beijing, Shanghai, Tokyo, London, Paris. Millions and millions of people living together, and yet we're just 100,000 people. But we're 100,000 people who have our own self-determination, which is something incredibly to be proud of. And we're 100,000 people who can lead the world in key areas of thinking, such as environmentalism. But we can only do so by being a strong and cohesive community. So I ask all states members, please do back and vote for and support this common strategic policy, which is not just that of the government, because it is born out of all of our manifestos and all of the thinking of the 49 members of this Assembly. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. Well, I've heard the word how said a lot. And that's interesting to me because I did formulate a whole document on the site called how.je. How do you actually deliver policies? How do you deliver solutions? And our job is actually to, as far as I see, support a democratically elected government, one that we, as a States Assembly, put in their current positions. We had an opportunity to oppose them. We've had an opportunity to challenge them. But we have who we have, and this is their document. And in looking at this actual document, I think we need to accept it is a high-level document. There are different ways of actually delivering. And although you're nodding at me, Deputy Osif, I have to say, I don't accept how is in this document. Because guess what? You've got something called scrutiny here. And we look at how you're going to deliver. So I'd like to just bring the attention of the Assembly to the fact that the Economic and International Affairs panel did look at this document. We did lodge comments. And just briefly, looking at some of the challenges, because we've actually applauded some of the aims in it, I very much do not wish this just to be a wish list. I don't think anybody does. There are some real challenges in the area of the economics, at least. We have some severe staff shortages across all sectors. That's been kind of exacerbated by housing and costs of living costs, things that actually are very much the concern of parties such as Reform. There are certain questions we're still even asking and are exploring, such as the idea of a skills barometer that actually is to be involved in upskilling a workforce that actually has the lowest unemployment that we've probably ever seen. So quite how that's delivered is another question. There's something mentioned called an enterprise strategy to cut red tape, incentivise startups, and help established businesses grow and thrive. But in this particular context that we have, there are challenges there. So we will be looking at these things. We've also mentioned that there is a part at the back about performance measuring. We didn't have time to produce a whole load of amendments there, but we really do believe that that's got to be questioned and that needs to be looked at and refined, hopefully, with the acknowledgement and agreement of the ministers who are our ministers of our government. So even though I am a backbencher, even though I had a manifesto, I do very much accept what has been produced through democracy, through voting and democratic debate, and I will be supporting this amended common strategic policy.
Deputy Felt.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I would like to thank the Council of Ministers for accepting both of the amendments that I brought to the Common Strategic Policy. I hope that they were helpful and I hope that they will make a positive difference. That brings me to the spirit of collaboration, in that even those of us that are voting against the Common Strategic Policy today, that does not mean that we can't continue to collaborate with our colleagues in government. And as Deputy Mezek, I think, quite clearly stated, where we have policies in common and we can support those, we will continue to do so. We will also continue to collaborate and bring amendments and try and be helpful with those amendments. And we will, of course, continue to deliver on our own manifestos. I think it was Deputy Ozef that mentioned that the Common Strategic Policy contains parts of all manifestos. I thought that was quite an interesting comment to make, actually, because I don't know if it was just me and my Reform Party colleagues, but it seems that colleagues that were not in government were not party to the discussions around the content of the Common Strategic Policy. And perhaps a more collaborative nature, if, you know, how Deputy Ozef described the formation of the Common Strategic Policy is correct. Perhaps a more collaborative procedure for the future would be to have workshops or discussions with members that are not in government prior to the writing, if it's going to be a document that we can all sign up to. But we're not in that position. We're in a position where we've got government colleagues and we've got colleagues that aren't in government. We've got people within this chamber, within this assembly, whose manifesto commitments are not clearly articulated within the document that is brought forward. I think Deputy Morell was saying, I can't quite remember his words, but he was fairly critical of the stance that our party leader articulated that we would be taking. I think it's quite normal for parties, whether they be political parties or individuals that are not in government, to not commit to the policies of others. And that is what we are doing. We are committed to our manifesto, but what we cannot do is commit ourselves to the policies of others. Now, bringing myself back to that word policy, when I first read the document, I have to say I was quite disappointed on an individual level because I couldn't find very many actual policies. In fact, to give you an insight into some of our Reform Jersey Party meetings, I did offer Freddo Frogs to anybody that could find a policy within the Common Strategic Policy. The clearest policy was actually that around the Opera House. It was clear, it was focused, and we know what the government's doing. We sought to bring amendments, obviously after the ruling from the bailiff that we couldn't seek to change more of the document than we would as much of the document as we would like. We sought to bring some further clarity around specific policies that were key to our manifesto, which is exactly why we brought the amendments related to housing and climate change, because those are key tenets that were formed part of our manifesto. That's what we promised our electors that we would do, and that's exactly what we did. We did not do it seeking to be divisive within this chamber. We did it in the spirit of collaboration. Had we perhaps have got those amendments through, we may have been more minded to vote in favour of the Common Strategic Policy. It may have been more in line with what we promised our electorate. But the document that we have, as amended and not amended, does not reflect the policies within our manifesto. And that is why we are not supporting it. It is nothing personal. It is not saying that we will not collaborate during the course of this term, but it is us doing what we said we would do when we knocked on people's doors in May and June. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the Common Strategic Policy as amended?
Thank you, sir. I'll be very quick because I know we will be on lunch very soon. So just in relation to housing and the cost of living, I think actually the words that were used were quite implicit in terms of the overall document itself. It potentially could have maybe been a bit broader. However, I will be supporting the Council of Ministers in terms of approving this document. But I am a bit concerned in terms of the H6 housing policy from January 2023 in terms of where there will be housing developers who will have to provide affordable housing. Just when you're looking at the margins, there could potentially be some disincentives for those developments to actually take place unless if you have more scale. So I do think actually that could potentially be an issue. I think JDC will also have an integral role in terms of providing more affordable housing moving forward, as will Andium Homes too. Of course, economy and skills is an area where I am very impassioned about, and I think this has probably been an area that we haven't really focused on, especially when we're looking at, say, tertiary-based education. Really what we have to be focusing upon is increasing the level of output and the quality of output within our economy, and also what we have to also be looking at here is the marginal efficiency of capital, so the return of investment as well. This is really going to allow us to really enhance our economy when we're looking at, say, GDP, or if we're looking at GVA or even national income. These are the kind of areas that we really have to be more focused on, more systemically driven as a legislature. And I really hope that there will be that support, that base of support, because that's kind of my area of specialism, if you like. And I just hope that over the next 4 years that we can, you know, ensure that we are going to progress and improve islanders' lives as well. So that's all I really had to say about that, sir. Thank you.
We're almost at the time when I would normally ask if the Assembly wished to adjourn or to continue. It might be helpful in making that view as to if any other member wishes to speak on the Common Strategic Policy.
So I may want to, I think though, probably more than a couple of minutes if possible.
Well, yes, but then of course the Chief Minister will respond after that. So it just gives the Assembly an idea as to whether we should finish now before someone starts to speak.
May I propose the adjournment, sir?
The Germans has proposed, that seems reasonable in the circumstances. The Assembly stands adjourned until 2:15.